when we're coming home, those thrusters are disabled. We're only using the smaller Draco thrusters around the service section, so the bottom of the capsule itself, and the 4 at the very top, the forward bulkhead thrusters. Our next question from Amy wants to know what happens to the parachutes after splashdown. Are they recovered?
Yeah, absolutely. So there will be, after splashdown, there will be 2 fast boats or smaller boats that will be approaching the Dragon capsule. The first boat is responsible for determining that there aren't any toxic vapors surrounding the capsule. That fast boat will then also be responsible for preparing the capsule for lift out of the water. The second boat is responsible for retrieving the parachutes out of the water. We definitely don't want to leave any waste behind where possible, and so that second boat is responsible for going and retrieving the parachutes. After splashdown, those parachutes are automatically cut so that there's no potential that if there was a little bit of wind, that the Dragon capsule wouldn't be moved due to wind catching in those parachutes. So great question, but short answer is yeah, they're cut. They're automatically cut after splashdown, and then one of the crews from the fast boats is responsible for going to pick them up. The next question we have coming from #AskNASA on Twitter comes to us from Novacon. What will be the purpose of the crew for the Crew 1 mission?
The Crew 1 mission will be what we call the first operational flight of the Dragon spacecraft. So the mission we're still on right now is a demonstration. This is still a test mission. This is when we're really proving out Dragon's capabilities from launch all the way through splashdown. After this test, if everything goes well and we're lined up great for a splashdown today, we'll sit down and we'll go through a certification process for SpaceX to fly operational missions. This means they'll be flying regular expedition long duration flights. So the Crew 1 will be the first 4-person crew to launch in a Dragon spacecraft and then spend 6 months on board the International Space Station. So we'll have 4 individuals, Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, Shanna Walker, and Soichi Noguchi from the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, launching in Dragon and then spending 6 months on board the space station doing science experiments, conducting spacewalks, repairs, everything that a normal expedition crew does. They'll just be arriving and leaving in a Dragon.
Yeah, I think Commander Chris Cassidy will still be on board with our targeted, given the current targeted Crew 1 launch.
SpaceX Dragon comm check from the PLT.
We've got you 5x5, Bob.
And I've to SpaceX and check between us.
And please repeat the last 5 seconds of that call. We had a bit of a comm dropout.
You out of clear as well. We have being Doug and I.
And Dragon, we copy that you heard us loud and clear. Unfortunately, the rest of the message was garbled. Please repeat one more time.
Yeah, we've got a good comm check between both of us, and we are complete with suit downing 4.010. How copy?
Okay, that was 5x5. We copy that you are complete with suit donning procedure.
Okay, it sounds like the crew now suited up. They just conducted those communications checks, those comm checks with the core here in Hawthorne. The core of the crew operations responsible engineer, that's essentially the person who's talking directly to Bob and Doug throughout their flight. That's rotated through a couple of different positions as we're on the 3rd shift of their flight home. And that'll be pretty much the person who's getting all of the updates to and from Bob and Doug, being that liaison between the teams on the ground. But they did those comm checks successfully. They are in their suits. They're going to stay in their suits and in their seats for the rest of the day, pretty much, from that deorbit burn.
SpaceX looking for an update on sections 1 through 4 of 4.700 deorbit preparation when able.
And SpaceX Dragon, we are complete with sections 1 through 4. And looking at section 5, the only thing left there to do is 5 alpha decimal 2. As far as the suit leak check, I think everything else is complete.
Okay, copy. Sections 1 through 4 are complete, and it sounds like we have. Sounds like you're completing fluid loading and standing by for the leak check.
That's a good copy, Mike.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
So what we heard there was communication between Dragon and...
And Mike, I just wanted to check back with you on the comm dropout that you had on the last 2 calls that I made to you. How is this comm now? Was it explainable as just random dropouts, or is it continuing from the PLTC?
Okay, Bob, we had you 5 by 5 just then, much better than before. We're investigating root cause, but given the clarity of your call just now, I would suspect your audio system is healthy.
Copy. Thank you.
Okay, so there we heard a little bit of communication, just confirming that we were that Mission Control was able to read or hear, as it's referred to, Bob and Doug clearly as they have put on their suits. We also heard the go for leak check. So now that the suits are on, we will be performing a quick leak check. We do this every time the suits are put on, or donned, as you heard it called. Basically, this is where we pressurize the suits. It's the only time that we pressurize them throughout the mission, and it's essentially to make sure that all the zippers are zipped up properly. All it takes is one small unzipped piece to not hold the pressure. So we make sure that everything is fitted up accordingly and that it's ready to go in case of a need to pressurize the suits later in the mission. Unlikely, but it's nice to know, just for that. For testing purposes, to know that that capability is there. That's what they're designed for. So that leak check will commence, and after we get that, we'll pressurize the suits themselves, and then they will depressurize. Bob and Doug will be able to lift the visor on their helmet again, and then that's essentially, that's what they will be wearing during this last phase of their mission as they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. So a lot of good stuff there. Again, nope. No call there.
Fake out.
Like we said before, we're taking your questions through Twitter this morning using the hashtag AskNASA. Our next question comes to us from Robert. Is the U.S. Navy supporting recovery with ships and aircraft?
They are not. I suspect that question comes from the last time we did splashdowns with U.S. spacecraft and astronauts, where we had the Navy assisting throughout the Apollo program for the recoveries. They are not assisting in this. All of the recovery assets for the nominal mission are SpaceX. So SpaceX owns both recovery ships, the Go Navigator and the Go Searcher, and then contract out with the different helicopters and other assets that are used in this recovery. NASA does have a Department of Defense backup, essentially. If Bob and Doug were to have to splash down anywhere other than those 7 sites that we target around Florida, we have the capability to call them up to effect a fast rescue and recovery using parajumpers or whatever assets are available to us. They are also called up on launch days in the event that we were to have an abort on the way to orbit, with them coming down somewhere in the Atlantic. But for now, today, everything is SpaceX and NASA.
Another question coming to us from Humzi. Is there a time limit on how long the capsule can be left to float in the Atlantic Ocean before it needs to be recovered? Yeah, so obviously we want to get the crew out as soon as possible, let them get out and stretch their legs and begin their medical evaluations. However, the capsule would be able to float there for a couple of days, like we mentioned before. There is enough onboard water and food. They would be comfortable, although if the waves pick up I certainly would not be comfortable. That being said, we do strive to recover them as soon as possible. This is part of the reason why we have numerous potential landing zone sites, and we have special criteria for where they actually land to ensure that we're able to get the crew up and out of the water and into the medical bays essentially within an hour after splashdown.
All right, our next one comes from Mark, who wants to know, can they take over from the computer and do a manual splashdown if required? They can. Initiating a deorbit or an emergency deorbit is one of the capabilities available to crew members on board. You would have to be in a pretty extreme situation to do that. Something we're obviously not in today, as everything's gone really smoothly with Dragon, but that is something that's available to them. They also have the capability to manually step in for a number of the different steps during the re-entry, both mainly for any parachute deployments or even cutting the parachutes after they've splashed down. If that doesn't happen automatically, they have a button right in front of them on their displays where they can make that happen. So they do have quite a bit of capability to jump in if required.
Yeah, that is one of the few hardwired buttons on their display panel, but it is certainly not one that can be triggered accidentally. It is a two-step verification lever, essentially. So no need to worry about performing an emergency deorbit accidentally. Next question comes to us from NASA plus space equals heart. I couldn't agree more. Will this Crew Dragon be reused? Yes, it will. This particular capsule is intended to be reused on the Crew 2 mission, which will be launching sometime next year. And yeah, we already have plans for reuse for it. In fact, the team at the Cape is already preparing to begin those refurbishment processes as soon as the capsule lands, essentially, really getting a head start on that. The capsule is waterproof. That was a process that we learned how to do through the Crew Cargo program. Our reuse efforts with that program, with our previous version of the Dragon capsule, also known as Dragon 1, the process of making that waterproof that knowledge that we learned from that has transferred over to Crew Dragon capsules, and it's safe to say that it is with very little refurbishment required to the internal hardware. There's very little refurbishment required because we're able to keep it watertight and eliminate any exposure to salt water, which for metallic surfaces does cause corrosion, which is no good for spaceflight. So short answer is that, yeah, we will be reusing this as soon as next year on the NASA Crew 2 mission.
All right, our next one from Lisa. What are Bob and Doug bringing back from ISS, if anything? There's quite a bit, actually. They have about 150 kilograms, or a little over 330 pounds of cargo, essentially strapped to the ground right underneath their seats. The lion's share of that is utilization or science samples. A lot of it cold stowage samples that's kept in powered freezers. Those samples coming from a range of biological and biomedical studies, a lot of them with the astronauts themselves as the test subjects. As cargo return, a pretty critical capability, as we execute a lot of the science on station, but we need to return a lot of the samples for analysis down in labs here on Earth, and they're going to be bringing a lot of that down. They're also returning some vehicle hardware items that have either malfunctioned or just passed their service life and need to come home or get inspected. And then a couple of their personal items, things like their sleeping bags are coming back with them. And they also have a couple of special items we've touched on a few times, including that tremor dinosaur that was chosen by both of their sons as their zero-G indicator for this mission, and the flag that was left there by Doug Hurley and his fellow crewmates of STS-135, the final space shuttle mission. That is coming home. It's been up there for just about 9 years, and it will fly again when we send humans around the moon in the not-too-distant future. And I know we haven't seen it, but I have heard that Little Earth is also coming back. I almost forgot about that. Little Earth was the zero-G indicator on Demo-2 and remained on station after that mission, and it's pretty sure it was packed away. to come home on Demo-2.
I think you're right. So right now, Dragon is currently flying over the far South Pacific Ocean. We have a nice little map here to show you of our ground tracking. So there you can see it on your screen. If you're curious, the yellow indicates where the capsule is in daylight. The red part of the line indicates where it goes into eclipse, or whenever it's basically hiding in Earth's shadow. So right now it's in daylight. Bob and Doug must be getting some pretty spectacular views as they're completing their suit up process. But at this point, we're going to take a quick break and leave you with our lovely ground map here.
Dragon SpaceX for video.
Go ahead.
Yeah, request to come back aboard when y'all are ready.
We are ready for you to come aboard.
Outstanding, and work. Dragon SpaceX, you are go for procedure 4.011 suit leak check.
Suit check in work.
Okay, so we just heard the crew now stepping into suit leak checks. As we've described a few times, this is when they're actually going to pressurize their suits that they wear for launch and entry, and really any of the dynamic phases of the mission. So they'll completely zip up and seal the suits, and then flow nitrox in to
SpaceX
confirm.
Dragon into decimal 2, we are ready to pressurize.
Dragon SpaceX, you are go to pressurize.
So Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley getting the go. They're going to pressurize their suits. So pressurized nitrox now going to flow in. Again, these suits are, we have confirmation the leak check is in progress. So these suits are worn as just another line of defense to help protect the crew members from the harsh environment of outer space. If they were to experience a cabin depressurization, any kind of poisonous leak in their atmosphere, or even a fire, these suits are designed to protect from all of those different instances. So the suit leak check is pretty standard. Anytime before we get into one of these dynamic operations, we just want one more check to make sure that the suit is ready to go in case it's called upon. And so they'll pressurize now and flow some nitrox, some nitrogen and oxygen through their suits. They'll look for it to maintain a constant pressure. And then once that's done, they'll depressurize the suits, and they'll leave the zipper open. They'll typically leave one zipper just unzipped a little bit when they're not pressurized. They'll still have cool air flowing through. In fact, they'll do what's called a suit purge just before we do the deorbit burn. So at the same time, they flush the cabin atmosphere itself with some cool down air. They'll flow some cooled air through the suits just to help regulate the temperature, the cooling effect inside the capsule, just to make sure the environment stays at a comfortable temperature for them, while the Dragon capsule itself heats up to about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So we got about a minute left in this suit leak check. We'll wait for the results on that, and we'll just be one more box checked on our way to the upcoming trunk set, deorbit burn, re-entry, and splashdown. And one interesting thing to note, if you're watching this ground track, you're going to start to see that line coming out of the bottom left corner and ending in the Gulf. That means we are on our final orbit. And so Dragon's basically on its last lap around planet Earth, the last 90 minutes it's going to spend until we just about get to that splashdown. So you can keep an eye on that. The line's going to stop moving where you can see it terminate in the Gulf.
Dragon SpaceX, we show nominal leak check.
Copy, show the same.
So there a minute ago, we had confirmation of nominal leak check. Again, that's just checking another box off on the to-do list as Bob and Doug continue their return home back to planet Earth. Up next, we will be making sure that the nitrox system is safed and that we are able to proceed into the next phases of our descent to the Gulf of Mexico. We are aiming for a splashdown site just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Right now, our recovery ship is en route to that designated location zone, and it will be there ready and waiting for Bob and Doug to splash down. There on your screen, we do have a live shot from Go Navigator. Again, that's our recovery ship located in the Gulf of Mexico. You can get a little bit of a feel for that wave action that we got there. Generally speaking, pretty calm looking based on the waves that we can see there in the shot. And yeah, so we're excited to be able to welcome Bob and Doug back home. Just checking my timeline quickly. Their landing will be coming up in just under 2 hours. We're looking at an hour and 57 minutes. That will be happening at 11:48 a.m. Pacific time, 18:48 Universal Coordinated Time. Before we get to their water landing, we have to perform a couple of steps prior to that. If you've been following along with us this morning, you're probably very familiar with this. But for perhaps those of you who have joined in within the last few minutes, at this point we are exactly an hour away from the next physical milestone that needs to be completed prior to Dragon Endeavour's return to planet Earth. Those activities will begin with claw separation. The claw is what connects the umbilicals, the power, the telemetry, the fluids between the Dragon capsule and its trunk. In order to expose the heat shield in preparation for Dragon's re-entry through the atmosphere, we need to jettison the trunk. It will disintegrate upon entering the Earth's atmosphere itself. So once we separate that, we're now able to step into what's called slew to deorbit burn attitude. That's essentially maneuvering the capsule into position to perform the deorbit burn. The deorbit burn is where we fire the 4 Draco thrusters that are located at the top of the capsule near the forward hatch. We call those the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. Those will be utilized to perform the deorbit burn. It'll last about 11 and a half minutes. That deorbit burn is what will be placing Dragon in its final trajectory to the exact landing location. So like I said, that'll be about 11 and a half minutes long. After that burn completes, we want to close the nose cone and lock it up. Like I said, that's where the forward hatch is located. And since these capsules are designed to be reusable, we definitely want to protect those thrusters and that hatch, because that is the hatch where the astronauts basically exit and enter the capsule when they're going in and out of the International Space Station. So once we have that nose cone locked and in place, we then begin to enter the Earth's atmosphere.
Dragon SpaceX for deorbit burn brief.
Go ahead.
Okay, first off, for timing, I'm showing no changes. Your tablet and onboard times on your timeline are within about 1 minute or less of our ground estimates. How copy?
Copy. Timing on board is per the iPads and within a minute.
Yeah, and even better, the onboard countdown in your timeline should be within a few seconds. So looking pretty good. For the vehicle, Endeavour is looking great for entry. The ready comm during Bob's comm check earlier, we consider temporary, and we are not tracking any system issues. How copy?
Endeavour's in good shape and good comm from the PLT.
Okay, as far as recovery goes, Go Navigator is just about at the recovery in position, so within a few kilometers. In addition, the WB is airborne. Recovery team is go at this time.
Go for recovery. Copy all.
Yep, and one quick go back. Recovery has arrived, so they are on station. In addition, for the weather, I'm looking at the weather right now from the water video from Go Navigator, and it looks like glass. It's awesome. The latest splashdown forecast, though, is winds at 2.25 knots, wave height less than a foot, and a 6-second period. How copy?
Copy. Winds, waves, and weather.
All right, so there we heard the deorbit briefing. This is basically the opportunity that the Corps here.
Okay, Doug, that's all we got for the burn brief. We'll talk to you shortly before deorbit sequence start.
Copy all. Thanks, Mike.
And correction there, we'll have the go, no-go for you shortly. That'll be the next step.
Okay.
Yeah, so as I was saying, the burn briefing there, just making sure that everyone's on the same page. Since Bob and Doug's primary role during re-entry is to monitor telemetry, timing, and data, it is important to make sure that their onboard timers, or basically time listings, are synced with the most recent trajectory simulations that we've generated here in Mission Control. So that's what that was, just making sure that their sequence of events was lining up with with what we're seeing down here in Mission Control. So all really good stuff there. We also heard that the recovery vessel Go Navigator is in position. So it is ready and waiting for splashdown, which, like I said before, will be occurring at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal, and we're just under 2 hours from that happening. So I don't know about you, Dan, but as we're stepping into these checks and you know, we did the leak check, we did have done a couple of comm checks, and now we're talking about deorbit burn. My heart's starting to go. We're getting there.
It's starting to feel real. We're waking back up.
Yeah.
It's time to bring these guys home. And I mean, hearing the Corps call up, the water looks like glass from the ship views. That's exactly the type of thing we want to hear. The wind has picked up a tiny bit to 2.25 knots. It's about 2.6, a little under 2.6 miles per hour. So still well within our margins for what we were looking for acceptable splashdown weather. Right now, in the room behind us and over in Mission Control Houston, teams are just doing a final go, no go. And so that should wrap up over the next couple of minutes, and then we'll hear them call that up to the crew members when they get the final go to do the deorbit burn. But we'll be doing all of the other activities prior to that, including the claw and trunk separation, and then just getting ourselves ready for deorbit burn. So things are definitely going to start picking up in the next couple of minutes. Really, the next hour is really where things start to happen. But we do have a couple of moments now to get joined by a special guest.
Dragon, SpaceX is go for the deorbit burn, and the burn has been enabled.
That's a great call to hear.
Never copy. Go for the deorbit burn, and we see it on board.
All right, so we just heard it. That means both the SpaceX and NASA teams are go for deorbit burn. So we are counting down to that deorbit burn. Still a bit of a ways off. It's just under an hour from now from starting for that 11.5-minute burn. But for now, as we are go for deorbit and return of Bob and Doug, we're going to send it over to the Johnson Space Center real quick, where Courtney Beasley is standing by in Mission Control Houston, along with NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, also there in Houston. Courtney?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, joining me in a studio here at NASA's Johnson Space Center is NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine. Jim, thanks for joining us today. Another historic day for our agency, returning humans to Earth in a commercially built and operated spacecraft. How is this mission paving the way for the future?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's really establishing the business business model for the future. So you can see today I'm wearing my Artemis shirt. And when we go to the moon, we're going to go with commercial partners. And you know, NASA's goal here, we don't want to purchase, own, and operate the hardware the way we used to. We want to be one customer of many customers in a very robust commercial marketplace in low Earth orbit, but we also want to have numerous providers that are competing against each other on cost and innovation and safety, and really create this virtuous cycle of economic development and capability. And that's what today's return is going to represent. This is the next era in human spaceflight, where NASA gets to be the customer. We want to be a strong customer. We want to be a great partner, but we don't want to be the only ones that are operating with humans in space.
And while on board, Bob and Doug were, of course, conducting science experiments and spacewalks. And how are NASA's efforts on this station contributing to life back here on Earth?
So when we think about the International Space Station, it really is focused on how do we do those transformational activities that benefit human life here on Earth. And certainly, you know, when we think about advanced materials, industrialized biomedicine, these are the things that we're developing every day. Some examples would include, as far as advanced materials, very, very thin materials like an artificial retina for the human eyeball, so somebody who has macular degeneration might not have to lose their eyesight in the future. We can only create materials that thin in the microgravity of space. We cannot do it here in the gravity well of Earth. But that's just one of so many examples. When we think about how we compound pharmaceuticals, when we think about how we you know, create immunizations for things like salmonella and other diseases, these are capabilities that are available to us because of the resource that is microgravity. But you know, advanced materials, things like very pristine fiber optic cables, we call it Z-band, for example. These are all things that we think that there is a marketplace for the future. So look, right now we're doing commercial resupply of the International Space Station. As of today, when Bob and Doug come home safely, we will be doing commercial crew to the International Space Station. The next big thing is we need commercial space stations themselves. And in order to create the market for commercial space stations, we have to have these transformational capabilities that come from the microgravity environment. And that's really what we're developing right now.
And as you know, a big day for NASA today, but how about a big week? This week alone, we launched Mars 2020. Artemis 1's launch vehicle stage adapter was delivered to Kennedy Space Center. And here we are completing the first commercially crewed mission to the International Space Station. What are your thoughts on the state of the agency at this point?
So make no mistake, NASA's budget right now is the highest it's ever been in nominal dollars. And it's at, you know, $22 billion. The budget request that President Trump gave us that is before the House and the Senate right now is $25.2 billion. It's not just about sustaining, you know, capabilities like commercial crew, commercial resupply, the International Space Station. It's also about developing new capabilities so that the United States of America can stay the preeminent spacefaring nation. It's why we created the Artemis program to go to the moon sustainably with commercial partners and international partners, to use the resources of the moon to live and work for long periods of time, and then take all of that knowledge onto Mars. And of course, as you mentioned on Thursday, you know, we launched another Mars mission. The most sophisticated robot that NASA has ever developed is right now on its way to Mars, and we're going to prove that we can turn the carbon dioxide atmosphere of Mars into pure oxygen for life support. But there's so many other things. We're looking for life on another world. We're looking for signs of ancient life on Mars. We're talking about microbial life, but life nonetheless. And this is really a bright moment for NASA. I want to be clear, though. We need support from our members of Congress in both the House and the Senate. We need to be able to get that $25.2 billion budget that we have requested. And so I'm working with members of Congress and senators on both sides of the aisle every day, doing town halls across the country. We are in great shape. But in order to stay #1 in the world, we're going to need the resources that the president has requested.
Jim, thanks for joining us today. Such an exciting day. And in case you missed it just moments ago, both SpaceX and NASA are both a go for deorbit burn. So with that, we'll send it back to Dan and Kate at Hawthorne for the latest.
All right. Thank you so much, Courtney. Great to hear from the administrator. And we're in it now. We're kind of in the final stretch. This is what I feel like we've been waiting for the last couple of hours, and it feels pretty great to be here.
Yeah, it certainly does. In this next phase of the mission, Dragon has a series of steps to complete before returning Bob and Doug home. As you've heard us talk a little bit so far this morning, Dragon will maneuver to the correct attitude and jettison its trunk, which is the cylindrical, unpressurized part of the assembly. We need to expose the heat shield in order to prepare the capsule for atmospheric reentry. So we will, there we got a nice view of Bob and Doug in their suits. This is the first time we've seen them in their suits and in their chairs this morning. So there they are tapping away, preparing to initiate the deorbit sequence. So let's talk a little, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, just like in the lead up in the last couple of minutes, we heard they had good suit leak checks. As Kate described earlier, once the leak checks are complete, they don't keep the suit pressurized, so visors are open. They're going to have cool air running through their suits and the cabin and just getting ready for the ride.
Yeah. Whenever they are re-entering the atmosphere, the external temperature will reach about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The internal temperature of the cabin, however, will stay around 85 degrees Fahrenheit. We have a couple of systems in place to keep it cool and comfortable for Bob and Doug as they are returning. Like Dan just said, there will be some cool air flowing through their suits. The cabin itself will also be purged with cooler air as well. So that will assist in making sure that the temperature stays pretty temperate inside the capsule.
And I mean, we're just 42 minutes and 50 seconds away from things really kicking up. And this is going to be when we really start to do that first maneuver to get ready to jettison the trunk. And then we'll do that claw and trunk separation. And then it's time for just kind of that final firing of those engines, that really just that downhill ride.
Yeah, those forward bulkhead thrusters, there are four of them, four of those Draco thrusters there at the top of the capsule near the nose cone. Those will be utilized to perform the deorbit burn. This burn is what will essentially give Dragon its final trajectory back home. This is the last burn that the capsule will perform. If you've been following along since yesterday afternoon, you know that there have been a number of burns completed. This deorbit burn will be the final one. It will last about 11 and a half minutes. After that burn completes, we no longer need to utilize those Draco thrusters, and we want to protect the forward hatch up there, so we close the nose cone and lock it up. We're expecting that event to happen at 11:11 a.m. Pacific. About 10 minutes, or excuse me, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, wow, mental math on air is hard. 25 minutes after that, the capsule will be re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and like I mentioned, approaching about 3,500 degrees, and that's because
we're in that heat of re-entry, and so that's where things will really heat up for Bob and Doug on their re-entry, and that's where we'll have that comms blackout. And we actually have a Twitter question that's germane to this right now, where Stephen asked, during the blackout, will you not be able to communicate with Bob and Doug, but you will be able to track them? And it's kind of a mix. We won't be able to talk to Bob and Doug. We won't be able to send or receive any data from the Dragon spacecraft. So we won't have basically telemetry-driven tracking, but we know exactly where they're going to be as their orbit's already been calculated. We've had this orbit calculated since yesterday, essentially. It's gotten fine-tuned as we've done those burns. But we'll know exactly where they're supposed to be, even though we can't communicate during that time.
Exactly. And even though we won't be able to send or receive signals or commands or telemetry, Dragon is designed to be fully autonomous. At that point, it is driving itself anyway, so there's really nothing to be worried about. Bob and Doug's primary function at that point is to monitor all of the telemetry that they see on their screens and to stay comfy.
Yeah, and once they're through that, that initial entry, we'll have that part called entry interface, which we kind of explained as that's when the capsule's really experiencing aerodynamics. They've been flying around in the vacuum of space with no air, so no lift, drag, stuff like that on their capsule. And entry interface is where they're really starting to hit the atmosphere, and it's affecting the capsule. And it'll continue to use its Draco thrusters in the service section to really guide it back home.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking Speaking of guiding it back home, here come the parachutes. At 11:44 a.m. Pacific or 18:44 Universal Time, we're going to be deploying the drogue parachutes. Drogue chutes are utilized for a couple of reasons. One, to continue to further decelerate the vehicle and also to stabilize it. Like Dan said, it will be experiencing some of those aerodynamic pressures, and so we want to make sure that the capsule is well and stable before we deploy the main parachutes. Those main chutes will be deploying at 11:45 a.m. and there will be 4 of them. Those will essentially deploy, and it takes a couple seconds for them to fully inflate. So it might look a little funny at first, but we assure you that they are working properly, and it just takes a couple seconds for the air to continue to catch in them and for them to fully expand to their large, rounder shape. So after those chutes deploy, it only takes 3.5 minutes for Bob and Doug to splash down. That'll be occurring at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal. And like we've mentioned before, our splashdown location is off the western coast of Florida. We're aiming for a location near Pensacola. Our recovery vessel Go Navigator is currently in location, ready and waiting for splashdown. They're actually going to be waiting about 3 nautical miles away from that splashdown point.
Yeah, we got the call that they were on station. We also got the call that the NASA WB-57 airplane is in the air, and we've actually seen a couple of brief spurts of video. That's the airborne asset that we'll have. That WB-57 is a high-altitude research plane that NASA flies. It's outfitted with a number of imaging cameras. The main one that will be seen is an infrared one. If you watched the Demo-1 splashdown, which I'm sure you all did, you were able to see that first, and this is actually a glimpse of that WB-57 camera. We'll be getting this back, and if we acquire it the same time we did for Demo-1, we were able to see the capsule while it was still in that atmospheric reentry, so it was just this really bright light that all of a sudden lit up the sky, and that was the first view we got of Dragon. And so we'll use that to hopefully see during the entry, and then the initial parachute deploys, and then we'll have a couple more assets on the ground or on the water, on the boat, that will get a couple more views of Dragon as it delivers Bob and Doug safely to the ocean.
Yeah, so as you can hear, all of this excitement will be happening in pretty rapid succession. On your screen now, we can see closest to the camera, we have NASA astronaut Doug Hurley. He is the pilot or the commander for this particular mission, and then there now on the camera to the right is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. We are very fondly looking forward to bringing our space dads home this morning, and it looks like we mentioned before, that'll be happening in about an hour and a half. Again, targeting splashdown for 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal Time. But like we mentioned before, the action really begins at the claw separation milestone, which is slated for 10:51 a.m. Pacific in about 38 minutes from now. So again, we are continuing to take questions this morning through Twitter using the hashtag AskNASA. Our next question comes to us from F1 Fanatic. Do the astronauts need to have face masks down during re-entry? That is a great question. Very astute observation that those visors are in the upward position. So right now, these suits are unpressurized, and Bob and Doug are breathing just the normal cabin air. Those face masks, our visors as we refer to them, do need to be lowered and locked during the re-entry period. We need the spacesuit to be fully enclosed during the more dynamic elements of operations, and certainly the re-entry period is one of them. So we'll actually at one point during the deorbit burn preparation phase, we will actually hear communication between ground station, from ground here, Mission Control Headquarters at SpaceX to Bob and Doug, just to confirm and double check that those visors are in place where they should be. Our next question comes to us from Philip. Where exactly are the parachutes stored before deployment?
They are stored in 2 separate compartments on the Dragon spacecraft, on a side of the vehicle that has a deployable panel The drogue parachutes are stored in the kind of the upper part. It's called the upper bulkhead, and they're deployed by 2 drogue motors or mortars. So pyrotechnics that are fired to actually deploy those drogue parachutes. Just further down the panel, kind of at the base of the spacecraft, is where the 4 main parachutes are stored. And again, those get drawn out by the drogue chutes. There are redundant systems in place to make sure that if the first set of mortars don't fire, you have backups to get these chutes deployed. We're one fault tolerant on both the drogue parachutes and the main parachutes. So 1 out of 2 drogues and 3 out of 4 mains is what the vehicle's been rated and tested to. SpaceX has done a tremendous amount of testing on these parachutes, even within just the last several months in the lead up to the mission. As parachutes, obviously a very critical part of the reentry, and this is something that is very meticulously packed and documented before the start of any mission. And NASA assisting SpaceX, as we have some experts who have been involved in parachute missions for decades. But the parachutes are stored under deployable panels, and we'll see them basically fire open as the parachutes come out and deploy at the different altitudes.
Yeah, those panels are basically located above and below the side hatch panel. So if you are looking at the Dragon capsule, the anchor point for those parachutes will ensure that the side hatch will effectively be as far away from the ocean surface as possible, ensuring that we're able to expedite the process of egressing Bob and Doug from the capsule and the whole recovery process as a whole. Great question.
All right, our next one comes from Scott. He wants to know, what are the tablets on their legs used for? What kind of devices are they? I think you've heard him call out a few times that they're using iPads on board, and they're really just essentially their user manuals. They're able to dial up different procedures, checklists, things that they're looking for throughout their flight. They're able to Velcro them essentially to their suits, and just like the main displays in front of them, they're touchscreen enabled, and they have the touchscreen capable gloves in their suits. It's really just another information source. Dragon doesn't have the big paper manuals that we were used to in the shuttle era and things like that, just kind of streamlining everything as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we mentioned before, this is a demonstration mission, and so Bob and Doug's job here is to make sure that everything is working as it should be. So a lot of what they're doing is going to simply be monitoring, well, not simply, paying attention can be, especially whenever there's a lot going on dynamically around you, is staying focused can be tough. So it's not an easy job what they have coming up, but they will essentially be responsible for monitoring all the data and telemetry that is being received on screens. And part of the debriefing that will happen once they get back on land is quite simply, was there anything that happened in reality that you weren't expecting or differed from what you were instructed would occur? So making sure that in the future fully operational missions that we have, starting with Crew 1, launching later this year, that those crews are fully prepared and that we make those, essentially those instruction manuals that they do have access to as perfect as possible. Because it is essential that we have correct information and that the crew is informed and aware of all the operations that are going on, regardless of whether or not they're not the ones necessarily commanding, because the vehicle is autonomous, but it is important that they do know what's going on.
All right, our next question comes from Sam. Might be the most important one of the day. Wanted to know if Bob and Doug can listen to the SpaceX webcast when they're inside the Dragon capsule. I mean, I certainly hope so. It's not like they have too much else on their mind.
Right.
No, they're not able to listen to us, but one kind of fun fact that always kind of makes us geek out a little bit is the crew members on board the space station will usually get NASA TV pumped up to them anytime their crewmates are launching or landing. So they're able to watch their friends and former crewmates as of just a few hours ago return home. So Chris, if you're watching, hi.
Great question. Another one comes to us from Ruhr Rocker. Does the Dragon capsule have windows where Bob and Doug can look out? Absolutely. Actually, one of my favorite pictures that Doug Hurley has posted on Instagram to date was actually one of the first pictures he posted at the beginning of this mission was a shot of what he could see outside of Crew Dragon's windows. There is a window located on either side of the side hatch, and it certainly will provide visual confirmation that re-entry is happening. Like Dan mentioned before, they'll be able to see a little bit of the energy that's being expelled during the re-entry period. Some of those pieces of the ablative material, as they heat up and are designed to flicker away, they'll actually be able to see that from the windows themselves. So it'll be quite the fireworks show.
All right, our next one comes from Joe. Wants to know, does the Dragon capsule have Netflix? Another important question.
Yeah, the answer to that is no. As our views here of the capsule cycle through, we'll be able to see what their screens look like. There we go. So there in the center screen, we actually have the ground tracking map. As you can see there, actually it might be kind of hard to make out, but Dragon is actually crossing over the Atlantic Ocean, now approaching what looks like England and Ireland. So it will be crossing over into Europe soon. And also on those screens to the left and the right of that ground track screen were their telemetry screens. So those will be the interface that they use during the deorbit burn, and that's what they'll essentially use to make sure that everything is looking good and performing nominally.
Yeah, and I mean, that center screen that you just saw, that's essentially the same map that we've been looking at throughout our coverage here today. So they're looking at a lot of the same data that we're trying to give you guys down here on the ground. Just where are they over the Earth? Because it can be a little disorienting to look out the window and figure it out quickly. But they're able to see just how far along their orbit they are, where those milestones are coming up. So they can just, again, they're in a monitor mode and they're ready, locked and loaded to jump in if required. Our next question comes from Roshan, who 7-year-old Ian wants to know, why is the Dragon capsule cone-shaped? For a very specific reason, and it's why a lot of spacecraft are in the capsule shape. When they were trying to really figure out the most efficient way to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, both from handling the trajectory without having wings like a space shuttle, starting over. When they were really first trying to figure out how to best shape a spacecraft to efficiently and effectively re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in the safest configuration, where they essentially landed on was a cone shape or a capsule shape. There were very initial drawings that you could find all manner of spacecraft that were put into wind tunnels, but at the end of the day, all the way back in the early days of spaceflight, when we were in the Mercury and the very early days, they were able to determine that the capsule shape was really the most efficient. That shape of heat shield dissipated the heat the best, was the easiest to control, and was really the safest option. And physics haven't changed since the 60s, at least not a great deal. So that's why you still see a lot of capsule-shaped spacecraft, and it's really just for re-entering an atmosphere. Good question.
So there on your screen, again, we have live shots coming from Dragon Endeavour as it is making its way back towards Earth. We are approaching the final steps of the day, of the mission, in fact. And at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:18 a.m. or p.m. Excuse me, Universal, we will have the splashdown of Dragon Endeavour. So right now, Bob and Doug are essentially cycling through, preparing for what we call deorbit burn initiation. This will be where the deorbit burn is what will be placing Dragon on its final trajectory to a specific landing location. That location was there were 7 possible ones. We determined the best one for today's reentry to be off the coast of Florida near Pensacola. The recovery vessel Go Navigator is in place, ready and waiting. And seems like Bob and Doug are pretty comfortable there. They are in their spacesuits. The leak check has been performed, and we got the call out that it was nominal, so everything good there. Right now, those visors are in the up position. They will be closed and locked whenever we get into the dynamic portion here upcoming in just a few minutes. Checking my timeline here.
We're just about 24 minutes and 20 seconds from things really picking up. That's when we'll start to get into the attitude to separate the trunk, and just about 8 minutes after that is when we'll start the deorbit burn. And again, that'll be the longest burn of Dragon's return journey. The latest timeline we got had it lasting for about 11 minutes and 22 seconds. It'll be the last firing of those forward bulkhead thrusters. The 4 Dracos at the very top of Dragon that'll eventually be covered up by the nose cone following the deorbit burn. And as we've said before, that deorbit burn is what commits them to coming home. When that happens, that capsule is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and that'll put them essentially on a collision course with planet Earth. It lines up their orbit to intersect with that splashdown point in the Gulf of Mexico. And while we have just a few more minutes until we get to that, we still have some questions coming in. Again, if you have one, jump over on Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA. This one comes from Scarif Survivor, who wants to know, does Dragon lose radio data contact with satellite or ground stations during re-entry? And the answer is really everything. As that plasma builds up around the spacecraft, it essentially prevents signals being sent or transmitted or received by Dragon's antennas around the outside of the spacecraft. So it's both satellites and ground stations that it won't be able to communicate with. But again, Dragon continues flying itself. We know what its orbit is plotted out to be, so we know where it is, and we even know the expected time of that comm blackout in about 6 minutes. So it does lose contact with everything. We won't be able to hear from Bob and Doug until they're on the other side of that blackout, and then we'll reestablish communication with Dragon. All right, we have another one from Nettie Banda. Wanted to know how many seats are in Dragon.
So as you can see on your screen there are actually, I guess one is hidden, there are actually 4 chairs there available. We will be utilizing all 4 seats on the Crew 1 mission launching later this year, currently targeted for September. Right now, Bob and Doug are only occupying 2 of them, as this is a demonstration mission. So yeah, we will be utilizing all 4 of those seats in future missions, but as of right now, I believe it was on the launch portion of the mission, one of those seats was occupied by Tremor, who, if you've been following along, is the sequined dinosaur that was voted on by the 2 sons from Bob and Doug as what should be the 0G indicator. So Tremor was strapped into a seat during ascent, and when they got the okay to release him, he started floating into the capsule and you know, gave us its sequined glory there on the edge of space.
All right, well, again, just another time hack as we're coming up on these. We're just a little over 20 minutes from the start of all of our deorbit burn sequencing starting. So we're looking at that to really pick up at about 10:48, as we'll start getting into the attitude for trunk separation, and then we start basically executing a bunch of steps that are going to commit Bob and Doug to this reentry.
Yeah, we're looking forward to those. It'll be quite the journey. Now, of course, with respect to the deorbit burn, Bob and Doug will remain in their seats and strapped in for the entire duration. In fact, they won't be exiting those seats until until they're able to egress or exit the capsule after it has splashed down and been recovered out of the ocean and safely resting in the nest of the recovery vessel. Along that note, our next Twitter question is from Brett. The question is, what is the orientation of the astronauts when seated? As in, do they face the front or the top of the capsule, and do they find it comfortable? Great question there. So in the views that we just had a couple minutes ago, they were, I guess what we would call in the reclined position. They were facing towards the top of the capsule. During the launch portion, whenever they were actually getting into the capsule, back in late May, the seats were actuated in the down position where they were facing towards the hatch. The angle of difference is about 40 degrees between the two positions. They actuate in order to make sure that whenever there are G's being experienced, that it is in the most comfortable and safely ergonomic way possible. So that's where seat or actuation comes in handy. Also, it also helps them to get in and out of the capsule. It's a little trickier whenever the seats are in the up position or when they're reclined facing upward toward the top of the capsule. As for comfort level, I've heard that they have found it pretty comfortable. The seats are actually custom fitted for each astronaut destined to be flying in it. So whenever a crew member is assigned to a mission, they will also be assigned a seat specifically. So there will be no mid-flight fire drills where everyone is switching seats. Everyone has a designated seat. They're essentially small, medium, and large, and the armrests are also customizable depending on how long the crew member's forearm is. So we have taken many steps with comfort in mind, as well as style. You've seen those spacesuits. They look pretty good in my opinion, but those spacesuits are also similarly custom fitted for each individual crew member. So with the combination of the custom fit of the suit as well as the custom fit of the seats, we have aimed to make it as comfortable as possible in the event of some sort of situation where we need to wave off an activity for up to 48 hours. That's a long time to be in a confined space, even if you are highly trained like these guys. So yeah, making sure that they are as comfortable as possible while inside the cabin was certainly high priority.
All right, our next question comes from Richard. This one deals with kind of hygiene on the space station. Just curious how the astronauts that have been on station a while, how do they stay so clean cut? I know there's not a barber on board. Do they cut their own hair? It just looks clean cut. Do they shower, do laundry? How do they do it? They do have to cut their own hair. Even the current commander, Chris Cassidy, who's still on board, famously shaved his head once as his fellow crewmate Luca Parmitano was about to arrive on space station, just so he had some bald company. But they do have trimmers on board the International Space Station that have a vacuum attached to them, so they're not just getting hair just all throughout the cabin, as like everything else, hair would just tend to float around and get caught in the drafts of the air circulation on board. So they use basically vacuum cutters in order to give themselves haircuts. So that's how they're able to do it. No professional stylists up there, but they're able to make do and stay a little less shaggy.
Quick time check here as we just passed 10:30. It's now 10:32 here in California. We are less than 20 minutes away from our first event here on our list as Bob and Doug begin to continue to check off the boxes of their return home. That first event is claw separation. That's essentially the initiation of trunk jettison. All of that means that we will need to unlatch the claw from the trunk. That is the mechanism that holds and connects the trunk to the capsule, delivers fluid, telemetry, power, all that good stuff. We need to expose the trunk in order for the capsule to deorbit. So we will jettison the trunk and then we will begin a deorbit burn a couple minutes later. That deorbit burn is slated to begin at 10:56 a.m. Pacific, 18:56 Universal Coordinated Time. So in just under 23 minutes, we're expecting that to start. Once again, if you're just joining us, we've got some live views inside the Dragon Endeavour capsule. Bob and Doug there in their seats as they are making final preparations and doing final reviews as we get ready to initiate the deorbit sequence. Closest to the camera there is NASA astronaut Doug Hurley, and further away from the camera is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. These are two incredibly wonderful humans. We affectionately call them our space dads here at SpaceX. It's been such an honor to be able to fly them. Of course, Doug Hurley was actually the pilot of the final space shuttle mission, STS-135, back in 2011. And honestly, when I heard that he was assigned to this mission, I cried because, just to have the opportunity to return the pilot of that final mission to the space station in this capacity is so cool. And I've loved following this mission since the moment that we started training for it here in Hawthorne.
Well, we know that they're ready. They've done all of their suit checkouts, everything to get themselves to this point. And once we begin these events, they're going to keep a very close eye, as again, crew is always in the loop to step in. But Dragon going to be executing all of these different maneuvers and separation events automatically via a pre-programmed timeline. We're continuing to count down. We'll have our first maneuver in a little under 13 minutes. We're a little over 15 minutes from the claw separation. That claw connecting the service module to the Dragon capsule itself. A series of quick disconnects will retract, cutting off any of the fluid and data paths between the two. And then shortly after that, just a few seconds later, the trunk will separate. And then we will be just less than 5 minutes away from that deorbit burn. Again, deorbit burn expected to last 11 minutes and 22 seconds.
Now, of course, during re-entry, Bob and Doug will be experiencing a couple of Gs. We're anticipating them to feel about 4 Gs during re-entry. This will make it a little difficult for them to move their arms around. Not impossible, but essentially what they're doing right now is reviewing all of the event details for Splashdown, making sure that and I've said this before, they have rehearsed this both they've rehearsed the sequence of events in person with the recovery team, as well as through simulations here at Mission Control or at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. So at this point, because it will be difficult for them to maybe flip through to the exact part of the procedure they might want to review during the actual re-entry event itself, they are reviewing those now in preparation for that splashdown or for the re-entry sequence.
We've got another Twitter question. This one from Laura Mountain. This one's pretty cool. Is it quiet in the Dragon, or does it sound like an airplane? Well, it doesn't sound like an airplane, at least not right now, as they're still flying through the vacuum of space. There's none of that rushing air. They'll get some of that once they're further down during their descent. And then they're also able to hear when the Draco thrusters fire. And one of the really cool things they've done to train the crew is SpaceX had a number of microphones placed throughout the cabin during that Demo-1 flight last year. And they were able to record what it sounded like inside through all of the major burns, the launch, the descent and landing, everything. And in the trainer upstairs here at Hawthorne at SpaceX headquarters, they have speakers set up where, as they're doing simulations or practice runs of the different phases of the mission, they're able to hear what it should sound like inside Dragon as they're going through that. So I know that's one thing Bob pointed out is one of the things they're looking for is, does this sound like I was expecting it to? Does this look like, is that a light I'm supposed to see? All of those different things that for them is like reflex by the time they've trained it this much. All right, well, at this moment, we are less than 10 minutes away from this sequence starting. We are just about 9 minutes away, in fact. And first, we'll see that maneuver where we'll get in the proper attitude or point Dragon really in the right direction for the claw and trunk separation. We're essentially going to do a 90-degree yaw maneuver, turn Dragon sideways to make sure the trunk goes out and away, not coming out in front of or behind the capsule, essentially re-entering the atmosphere with the capsule. We're going to avoid that. And then Dragon will position itself for the deorbit burn. It's going to point those forward bulkhead thrusters into the direction that it's currently traveling. This is called a retrograde maneuver, and this is done specifically to, we're going to slow the capsule down, but more than anything, we're changing the perigee or the lowest point of the capsule's orbit. Again, essentially putting it up on an intersection point with that spot in the Gulf where we're coming home. Eight minutes, Kate.
We are getting close.
Dragon SpaceX for deorbit sequence.
Go ahead.
All right, Doug, we are 5 minutes out from deorbit sequence start. In addition, just wanted to inform you we are expecting some ratty comm during claw and trunk sep due to vehicle orientation.
Okay, copy. We see 445 left for the slew, and then ratty comms during the claw sep.
Good read back, Doug.
Kate, we are almost 4 minutes away from this starting.
Yeah, we just heard the call out there, confirmation from SpaceX Core down here at Mission Control to Crew Dragon that we now under 5, but at the time of the call, 5 minutes away from deorbit sequence start. So like we've been mentioning before, that deorbit sequence will involve separating from the trunk and performing the deorbit burn. As you may have noticed on your the ground tracking map that we've been showing you before, Bob and Doug were in their last orbit around Earth. I can't remember what the number was that you quoted earlier, Dan, but they have done thousands of orbits around Earth during their 2-month duration on station. So it is really exciting that the line that we see on that trajectory map is no longer fully around it. They're coming home.
We're not seeing two lines showing what their next orbit is going to be. They are on their final orbit of planet Earth. And this is their 1,024th orbit around our planet since they launched back in May of earlier this year. So we're counting down. We're under 3 minutes away from that first maneuver, and that's going to be a slew, as you heard Doug radio down. And that's essentially, we're going to change the attitude. We're going to use those Draco thrusters to essentially spin Dragon about 90 degrees to the side so we can jettison that trunk. And that'll be done in 2 stages. We'll do the claw separation and then the trunk separation. 2 minutes, 32 seconds, and counting. This is where things really pick up. This is where we really commit to coming home. And this is where we're in kind of the final stages of Bob and Doug's trip in outer space. Pretty soon we'll be seeing them in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, well, they are staying comfortable and continuing to monitor data and telemetry in the vehicle. Dragon is actually doing a couple of things itself to prepare for this deorbit sequence. Again, it's doing these things autonomously. It's isolating the thermal control system loops from the radiator. This is the system that will help keep Bob and Doug cool while they are re-entering the atmosphere. Like we've said before, the external temperature will reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and that thermal control system is what helps keep them cool during that time. Also, Dragon is initiating the separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate the data, the power, and the fluid connections between the capsule and the trunk. So right now, the vehicle is preparing to execute that, and we are anticipating execution of claw separation in 3 minutes and 35 seconds. So, we've been here for 10 hours,
Couple hours.
I think, at this point. The webcast as a whole has been going on for almost a little bit less than 24 hours. So, we're in the final moments here as Dragon is beginning its journey home to bring Bob and Doug back to Earth.
Yeah, this is the moment that Dragon is in the position to start coming home. The recovery team's already on station. They have been for a while out there off the coast of Pensacola. We are less than a minute from starting all of these carefully choreographed sequences to essentially split Dragon in half, get rid of that trunk so we have the capsule, point the heat shield back down towards Earth following that deorbit burn, and then we bring them home. We are just about 30 seconds away now from maneuvering Dragon to get ready to get rid of that claw first, and then that trunk separation. There will be about a 35-second difference or 35-second jump from separating the claw to separating the trunk. And we'll keep our eyes on the ground track for you and make sure we get kind of exact locations of when these separation events are occurring. We're looking for both the claw and the trunk to separate cleanly, and then it'll be less than 5 minutes until we do the deorbit burn.
Yeah, and after that, it'll...
Dragon SpaceX, deorbit sequence start.
All right.
Great news.
Never copied.
All right, so the Draco thrusters on Dragon starting to fire. It's now moving its way over to the trunk jettison attitude. We should be about 2 minutes away from the claw separation.
For those of you that are just tuning in, you are just in time. At this point in the mission, we are now beginning to execute the final steps of Dragon Endeavour's return to Earth. Right now, we are performing the claw separation slew, which basically means Dragon is maneuvering itself into position, into the proper attitude in order to separate the Dragon trunk. And that will be initiated first by separation of the claw. The claw is the mechanism that attaches the trunk and the capsule together. The claw is what delivers power and telemetry and fluids, and we need to expose the heat shield. Right now the trunk is blocking that. So we will jettison the trunk, and we will then have allow us to maneuver into the proper attitude to perform the deorbit burn, which Dragon has performed a number of burns so far overnight and early this morning. And this will be the final burn that the vehicle has to perform for this mission.
And we just heard confirmation Dragon's in the trunk separation attitude. We are now standing by for claw separation.
And we just heard confirmation of claw sep.
And with the claw separated, we're now standing by for the trunk separation in less than 30 seconds. Ten seconds till trunk separation.
And we just heard confirmation of trunk separation.
The trunk separation coming at 10:52 a.m. Pacific, with Dragon flying over the Indian Ocean just off to the west of Australia.
Dragon SpaceX, we showed nominal trunk jettison.
Oh yeah, we felt it.
All right. So the crew just got the call, nominal trunk separation. That's exactly what we were looking for. Next up is going to be that deorbit burn. Again, this is the longest burn of their trip home. This is the longest firing of those thrusters and the last time we're using those forward bulkhead thrusters.
Exactly. Those forward bulkhead thrusters, like Dan just said, that's what we're using to perform the deorbit burn. Once we do that, we will then be able, that deorbit burn will last for 11.5 minutes. Once that is completed, we don't need to use those thrusters anymore, so we will close and lock the nose cone in preparation for re-entry.
So we're a little under 3.5 minutes from the start of the deorbit burn. Again, our sequence of events has started. We're able to separate that claw at 10:51 a.m. Pacific. It's 17:51 GMT or Universal Time. And then at 10:52, just a minute later, the trunk separating while Dragon was flying just off to the west of Australia. So claw separated, trunk separated. Next up, deorbit burn.
Yeah, right now, Dragon is running exclusively on battery power now that the trunk is separated. Also, right now, telemetry is looking really good for the vehicle. The nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield is exposed and ready for atmospheric re-entry. Like I said before, that nitrox system, which is essentially the air that we breathe every day down here on Earth, nitrogen-oxygen combination, a mixture. It's the same stuff that they put in your scuba tank if you are a scuba diver. The nitrox system is used to cool the cabin and the suit to keep the crew comfortable during the re-entry phase. They will actually have cold air flowing through their suits themselves, as well as through the cabin itself. So a two-pronged approach to maintaining a comfortable temperature there inside the capsule. Like we said, the next event that we have coming up will be the deorbit burn, which we're expecting that to commence in 1 minute and 40 seconds. According to the ground tracking map there, Dragon is approaching the southwestern coast of Australia.
We're excited.
Jinx.
We are inside a minute to deorbit burn. And again, one more time, this is the long one. This is expected to last 11 minutes, 22 seconds. This is that burn that commits the Dragon to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And you can get kind of a sense of just how far they're going to go. By the time they fire this burn, they're just going to be off to the southwest of Australia. And this is going to realign their orbit to intersect with that point off the coast of Pensacola where they're going to be splashing down.
Yeah, this is the moment where Dragon is fully committed to the re-entry point. Again, we are aiming for just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Our recovery ship Go Navigator is ready and waiting to begin the recovery process right after splashdown occurs. Once again, if you're just joining us, we are now in the final steps of the deorbit sequence. The deorbit burn will be starting here in just a couple of seconds.
And we just heard confirmation deorbit burn has begun. That coming at 10:56 a.m. Pacific. Again, while the Dragon spacecraft just off the southwestern coast of Australia. So here we go. 11 more minutes to go.
I'm ready, and I'm sure it's safe to say that Bob and Doug are ready. They've done a number of interviews over the last few weeks while they were on station, and just the excitement and the enthusiasm for the mission is palpable. Just the opportunity to be able to fly these two incredible humans to the International Space Station and back is such an honor, and we're just really excited to get our space dads home safely and back to their families as quickly as possible. This deorbit burn that we are currently in, it will last 11 minutes and 22 seconds.
Already a little more than a minute 10 in counting, so we have about 10 minutes to go. Just heard a call. The propulsion system performing nominally. That's the word we always want to hear, we always like to hear. So just under 10 minutes to go left in this burn.
And all within the last 10 minutes, Again, it seemed like we had slow progress of events all morning, and then boom, within the last 10 minutes, we had a couple of things happening. Dragon maneuvered itself into the appropriate position to jettison its trunk, and it did so successfully, nominally, and then it initiated the deorbit burn just a couple minutes ago. Like I mentioned earlier, this deorbit burn is the last time those 4 forward Draco thrusters will fire, forward kind of meaning at the top of the capsule. Dragon Endeavour has not yet entered Earth's atmosphere, but this deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on its final trajectory to the landing site in the Gulf of Mexico. Right now, although we can't see it at the moment, Bob and Doug are using their screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, Draco thruster firings, and trajectory details such as entry angle, capsule perigee, and how much distance is remaining until that deorbit burn terminates. So Dragon is flying itself, so all they really have to do is stay strapped in their seats and keep tabs on things. So while this burn is completing, again, we're just a few minutes into it. It'll last 11 minutes and 22 seconds. We have a couple more events coming up afterward in, let me check my timeline here real quick. In just under 44 minutes, we will have the initial parachute deployment. So that is essentially when we will be deploying the drogue parachutes, the small parachutes that are designed to further slow down the capsule as it is re-entering the atmosphere, as well as stabilizing it. And then a minute after that, we will deploy the drogue parachutes, and that is targeted for 11:44 a.m. Pacific, 18:44 Universal. And then just a couple minutes after that, we will have Splashdown. So again, that's all in just under 44 minutes. Right now, we are performing the deorbit burn.
We've got a little over 7 minutes left in this burn. And the only performance call we've gotten so far is everything's still looking good with the propulsion system on Dragon. Once this burn completes, we will have kind of a couple minutes, about 3 minutes to catch our breath before things pick right back up and we get the nose cone closed. And then there'll be a bit more of a gap, and at that point, they will maneuver Dragon to its entry attitude, essentially heat shield pointed down and into the line of velocity, and that heat shield protecting them from the heat of reentry. Temperatures getting up to about 3,500 degrees on the Dragon spacecraft. But everything looking good. We're about 5 minutes into this deorbit burn. Again, it started right at 10:56 a.m. Pacific time, 17:56 GMT. Dragon was flying about 260 statute miles just off the southwestern coast of Australia.
So right now, during this burn, we just heard a call that we're halfway through the burn and everything is looking great, everything performing nominally. During this burn right now, Bob and Doug are currently monitoring the deorbit tool, which, like I said earlier, captures things like the perigee, the reentry interface, how much distance remains before the burn itself is terminated. They're also monitoring the burn duration and the firing of those Draco thrusters located there at on the forward bulkhead of the capsule. There on your screen, you actually can see what Bob and Doug are seeing right now. That is that tool on their screen. So on the left and the right of the center screen, that is the deorbit. That is the deorbit monitoring tool.
Just past 7 minutes into the burn, a little over 4 minutes remaining. Everything's still looking good with Dragon Ship Endeavour's deorbit burn to commit it to coming home. Everything continuing to be on track for our splashdown. Again, our splashdown time right at 11:48 and 24 seconds Pacific was the calculated time. It would be typical if we're a couple seconds on either side, but that time is 18:48 GMT or Universal. But we're already through several of the really major steps to initiate this re-entry. The claw is separated, the trunk is gone, the deorbit burn has begun, and we're more than halfway through, just a little under 3.5 minutes remaining.
There on your screen is a shot of our Mission Control Center here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, where the Dragon operators and mission leaders are there monitoring Dragon's progress. They continue to watch the propulsion data and all the GNC data, making sure that everything is looking healthy and nominal.
We're just about 2 minutes, 30 seconds until the end of this burn. We'll listen for the call out up to the crew on the performance of the burn, and then they'll start moving into the next steps. Again, we'll get about a 3-minute breather before the next major milestone comes up when we get ready to close the nose cone, that protecting the docking ring, guidance, navigation, and control sensors, and also these 4 forward bulkhead thrusters that are currently performing the deorbit burn during the actual re-entry process. So we are at just under 2 minutes from the conclusion of the deorbit burn.
Again, Dragon is committed to its splashdown point. There is no going back.
Yeah, we already have the recovery team ready and on standby. They've been there for quite some time now. Here, and we have about 90 seconds left in the burn. Weather looking great at the splashdown site off Pensacola. Winds just around 2.5 miles per hour. Sea being described as like glass by the Corps here in Hawthorne, radioing up to the crew. Ended up getting fantastic weather for this first crewed splashdown of Dragon. We are 1 minute away from the end of deorbit burn.
Again, this burn is placing Dragon on its final trajectory to the landing site off of the coast of Pensacola, Florida. That is in the Gulf of Mexico. And our recovery vessel, Go Navigator, and the recovery team are ready and waiting to see Bob and Doug come back through the atmosphere. Like we said, this deorbit burn, during this deorbit burn, they're not actually re-entering the atmosphere just yet. That won't happen for about another half hour or so. This is essentially just lining up Dragon on the right course to that splashdown site.
Yeah, still in an altitude of about 254 statute miles over planet Earth. We are coming up on 10 seconds from the end of the burn, so we'll stand by and wait for the call out to the crew on the burn performance.
Dragon, SpaceX, deorbit burn complete, performance nominal, nose cone closure initiated.
Nominal burn, nose cone in work.
All right. Deorbit burn complete. We heard the call, nominal burn. Bob and Doug are on their way back home. This burn commits them to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Ooh, all we have left now is to wait. That was really one of the last major moments before they start re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. We'll have the nose cone closure coming up next. That should be coming in just a couple of minutes, as we had about a 3-minute span between the end of the deorbit burn and that moment.
Yeah, the nose cone is actually currently in the closing process, so it doesn't just snap shut. It does slowly close and lock. So right now, that nose cone is in the process of moving back into the closed position, and we will hear the call out for whenever it has fully closed and whenever the latches have secured.
Seeing some data, it looks like it's about halfway there. It's opened a little bit more than 90 degrees. I think the exact count was 110 degrees opening range or range of motion for the nose cone. So we're a little more than halfway now to getting that nose cone closed.
So I have just heard that we have a visual on nose cone closure. So it'll take a minute for the hooks to close in. They close in a series. So the first series will close and then the second will follow, and that'll take about a minute to complete.
All right, well, as we just wait for the finish to that nose cone closure, we'll have a bit of time again. We'll have about 20 minutes, or a little over 21 from right now, until we really start re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. We're expecting that entry interface in about 21 minutes. And then right around that time, we'll also be looking for that blackout we've been talking about. We've had a little bit of what we call Radicom at this point. So you'll hear kind of some sporadic interruptions in the audio transmission just because of how Dragon was oriented for the trunk jettison and for the actual deorbit burn. But that blackout period will be due to the plasma that builds up around the capsule, interfering with those antennas either sending or receiving data.
So I've heard the call out that the first set of hooks for nose cone closure are in motion. So this will complete in 2 sets. The first set is now in motion. So really good news to hear that. Everything looking good so far. Like I mentioned before, in the background, Dragon has inhibited the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete that deorbit burn. This is to ensure that it's safe to latch that nose cone shut for reentry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox purge. Nitrox is simply a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen. It's what we breathe, and the nitrox that is being purged into the system is cooled, so allowing that cool air to circulate around the cabin, but also inside of Bob and Doug's suits will help to keep them cool and comfortable during re-entry, which will be coming up in about 20 minutes. We're currently tracking 23 minutes and 20 seconds until entry begins. So in case you're just joining us at this point, the nose cone has closed. The forward thrusters have been disabled, and we are latching the nose cone. Currently underway with the first set of hooks, the first of 2 sets. And we just had confirmation that the first set of hooks is closed, so now the second set will begin to close as well.
As we mentioned, after this nose cone's fully closed, we'll have a couple of minutes to catch our breath again, about 20 minutes or just under 20 minutes until Dragon will start to maneuver itself to the entry attitude, essentially pointing the heat shield in the direction of travel as it's going to be leading the way through their reentry through the Earth's atmosphere. We'll look to run into that communications blackout at about 36 minutes after the hour, expecting that to last for about 6 minutes, and then we'll get that back shortly before we deploy the drogue parachutes, followed just less than a minute later by the main parachutes, and by that point hopefully we should have some views of Dragon re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and parachuting to a splashdown in the Gulf.
So there in the front row of Mission Control in the center, you can see CEO Elon Musk and our President Gwen Shotwell sitting side by side at those center consoles. In addition to those two, the room is filled with Dragon operators and mission leaders who are continuing to monitor the health and telemetry of the crew and the capsule. Right now, nose cone closure is underway. The first of 2 sets of hook latching has completed. And we just heard a call out that the nose
SpaceX nose cone is secure for entry.
Copy. We see you on board.
All right, great confirmation there. Back and forth from Mission Control here to Bob and Doug up in Dragon Endeavour. That Bob and Doug have also confirmed on their displays that the nose cone has closed nominally and it is secure for entry.
So that nose cone close completion. A lot of tongue twisters with this right now. Coming with Dragon still flying over the South Pacific. It is on its way home. We're going to gradually start to see its altitude dip. Right now, already only 207 miles over the Earth's surface. It was at about 260 miles when it was still over on the other side of the Pacific Ocean off the southwestern coast of Australia when it fired its engines for that deorbit burn. So its altitude going to continue to drop. Once it gets to about 100 kilometers in altitude, or about 62 miles, it's going to begin what's known as entry interface. And that's when it really begins to start to feel the effects of the Earth's atmosphere. Will once again be experiencing lift and drag as it's no longer in that near vacuum environment in low Earth orbit.
So we're essentially stepping into the second half of entry. Dragon is now beginning to flush nitrox into the cabin and continuing to top it off in Bob and Doug's suits as well. Again, this is cool air essentially flowing through the cabin and the suits. This is what will allow them and the cabin itself to remain comfortable during reentry while those external temperatures reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. At this point in time, Dragon's orientation is such that the heat shield is pointing forward, if you will, leading the capsule toward the landing site. If you've been following along over the last couple days, you know that weather has been a big ticket item for us. The recovery team has been busy over the last week working to determine the selection of a landing site In order to increase the options for space station departures, the team identified a total of 7 possible splashdown locations. In order to meet NASA's timeline requirements for crew recovery, these potential splashdown locations have to be close to a port, and they have to be close to medical facilities. So with all of that in mind, you add the ever-evolving weather conditions of Florida, but also that tropical storm Isaiah that was moving through. And it's easy to see how determining that landing site is quite a complex process. Since Dragon is capable of splashdown on either side of the Florida Panhandle, we in fact have 2 identical and fully equipped recovery vessels ready to support. One in the Gulf of Mexico, which is what we're utilizing today, Go Navigator, and the other located off the east coast of Florida, able to service landing sites in the Atlantic Ocean. That one is Go Searcher. Like I mentioned, today we'll be splashing down in the Gulf of Mexico, just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Go Navigator, that recovery ship I just mentioned, is in place and ready and waiting for Bob and Doug. The WB-57 plane, if it hasn't taken off already, I'm sure it will be very soon.
Yep, it's in the air.
Okay, great. That's what will provide our first views of Dragon during reentry. We'll get a thermal cam off of that airplane, allowing us to see the capsule as it is reentering the atmosphere. If you were tuned in for our Demo-1 broadcast, it was basically a big ball of light coming at us. We'll also have cameras on board the recovery vessel, so as Dragon gets closer and is deploying those parachutes, we will also be able to have hopefully some really clear footage of that all occurring as well.
All right, so Dragon's altitude continuing to dip. Right now about 174 miles over planet Earth. We're under 11.5 minutes from where we expect to hit entry interface. So that's where Dragon will really start feeling the effects of being in a denser atmosphere. And then we are still tracking that blackout to come right around that same time. We are under 27 minutes away from splashdown. So we are under 27 minutes away from Bob and Doug being on planet Earth for the first time since May 30th.
To kind of put everything in perspective, the Dragon capsule departed from the International Space Station several hours ago, but according to what Dan just said, it's essentially halfway home just based on altitude alone. So the International Space Station is about 250 miles above Earth's surface. I think right now it's between 250 and 300. I think right now it's about 263 miles above Earth's surface. So based on that telemetry that Dan just read off, is from an altitude standpoint, Dragon is halfway home, and yet that second half is going to be covered in the next 27-ish minutes while we wait for splashdown and recovery, versus the several hours that we've been covering since yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, and we will continue to see its speed drop as it's dropping out of orbit. It's starting to hit the atmosphere. It's starting to slow from the effects of that friction, generating the heat on the heat shield and building up the plasma eventually around the spacecraft. Its speed's going to continue to drop. It's already below 17,000 miles an hour, and it'll drop to essentially a terminal velocity of about 350 miles an hour right as those drogue chutes deploy. And those are going to pop out when sensors on the Dragon spacecraft, both GPS and pressure sensors, tell the spacecraft it's at the right altitude, and then those will automatically deploy. Those drogues coming out of the top section of the spacecraft using 2 mortars, or pyrotechnics essentially, to deploy those to do the initial slowing and stabilizing of the Dragon capsule.
Yeah, then after that, the main parachutes will pop out and further decelerate it to about 119 miles per hour. And then that will continue to decelerate. And by the time that the capsule is splashing down in the Gulf of Mexico, it's only going 15, 16 miles per hour. So significant reduction in speed there over just the course of a couple minutes. That, of course, is a pretty comfortable speed. The way that the astronauts have described it previously with other types of missions also landing down, doing land landings at about the same rate. They said it feels like you're in a minor fender bender.
Yeah, you're definitely running into something. You'll feel it, but they do a lot of work with the seats and the restraints with these crew members just to make sure, while it may be a fender bender, you got more than a seatbelt essentially holding you in. So they're very secure in their suits and in their seats, and they're going to stay in there even after Dragon touches down. We'll still have communication with Dragon. Once they're in the water, it'll stay powered on. Probably most importantly, the air conditioner will continue to work while they're in the capsule in the now Gulf of Mexico, and much warmer temperatures than they've seen for the last couple of months. And we'll still be able to talk to them from here in Hawthorne, and the recovery teams will be able to as well.
Yeah.
One of the things we might see them do, depending on sea states and everything after they touch down and the crew themselves, they'll still have a couple of demonstration tasks potentially to carry out. They have a satellite phone inside of the capsule that has its own satellite antenna integrated into Dragon, and they're able to use that independent of Dragon's communication system. So one thing we might hear them do is do a test call on that to the teams here in Hawthorne. We wouldn't be able to hear the call, but you would hear the go to do it over the Dragon to ground audio that we've been listening to this entire time. So still have a couple of demonstration steps, essentially, as, again, this is a test flight. This is the flight to really prove out Dragon systems, to bring crew members from Kennedy Space Center to the space station and return them safely to Earth. And so far, we have had a flawless ride downhill. We've completed the deorbit burn. Dragon is continuing to drop down. It's right now at about 132 miles over the Pacific Ocean. Pretty soon we're going to see its ground track cross over Central America, out over the Gulf, culminating in that splashdown in the Gulf just off the coast of Pensacola.
Dragon SpaceX for entry brief.
Go ahead.
Okay, Doug, we have no update to timing because the burn went great and your vehicle is still looking really good for entry. No health issues at this time.
Okay, Dragon copies. Thank you.
In addition, the recovery team is go and the weather is still great. Winds are about 2 knots and waves about 1 foot. From the ship, they're reporting very calm. How copy?
Copy. Good weather at the landing area. Thank you.
Okay, and last piece is that we do expect some additional RADI-COM during entry prep 2 due to vehicle attitude. So if you can get us your entry check report a little bit prior to entry prep 2, we'd appreciate it.
Copy. We'll go.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
So there we just had a bit of a briefing between Mission Control and Bob and Doug up in Crew Endeavour, just confirming with them that the deorbit burn was great and that the timing on their pads doesn't need to be updated. We are able to upload new trajectory calculations, including times that remain live depending on how the burn goes, and at this point in time, those don't need to be updated. It is important that they do remain accurate because Bob and Doug, their primary mission right now is to continue to monitor the vehicle status and telemetry and data being presented to them on their touchscreen displays in front of them, and so during the more dynamic events, they certainly want to be aware when things like parachute deploy will be happening and when splashdown is expected. So making sure that the timeline of events, the sequencing is accurate is certainly important in order for them to stay aware and updated of upcoming events.
Just another quick position check. Dragon still out over the Central Pacific, down to about 108 miles in altitude. We're expecting that entry interface to come up in the next 4 minutes or so. Again, at that point, Dragon should be at an altitude of right around 62 statute miles, or about 100 kilometers. and that's when it really starts to feel the effects of the atmosphere. It starts to experience the lift and drag and other atmospheric effects it's been free from while flying in the near vacuum of low Earth orbit. So continuing to drop in altitude, still looking for an on-time splashdown. Should just be about 19 minutes from now. And just a reminder, we do have that blackout period coming. So as they continue to dip in the Earth's atmosphere and get lower and lower, the atmosphere gets thicker and thicker, and it's going to generate more and more heat, eventually heating up the outside of Dragon to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And as it hits that peak heating, it'll also be forming a plasma around the spacecraft. So we do expect to lose comm for about 6 minutes.
SpaceX Dragon crew entry preps are complete.
SpaceX copies. Entry prep complete. Thank you.
The call from Spacecraft Commander Doug Hurley. Entry preps are complete. So they are on board, they are monitoring, they are ready to come home.
Yeah, and as of right now, entry prep should have also included final configuration of their flight suits. So we had a question from our social media earlier if the visors will be up or down. Those visors should be down at this point as part of that entry prep check. In that last briefing, we also heard that the weather is looking good. In a previous report, the phrasing was, "It looks like glass." And that is certainly ideal for a water splashdown. That being said, the recovery timeline, Bob and Doug should be out of the capsule within an hour after splashing down. So good to hear that the weather is good. We saw blue skies and a couple of white fluffy clouds out there in the Gulf of Mexico as we got views from our recovery vessel Go Navigator. But glad to hear that conditions are sustaining and that winds also are looking really good, around 2.5 miles per hour. So hardly anything at all. Really couldn't ask for better conditions for a splashdown day.
We kind of threaded the needle once again, almost like we did on launch with the weather today. Your upper limits for wind were about 10 miles an hour, so we're well below that threshold for a splashdown today. The Dragon coming up on 82 miles in altitude, continuing to dip down. We're expecting that entry interface to start pretty soon, where the vehicle itself's really going to start heating up. It's going to continue to use its Draco thrusters to maintain its attitude as it continues through the Earth's atmosphere, and we'll have that comm blackout coming up in just a couple of minutes as well. Just heard the cabin purge has started again. This is when they're going to flush the cabin of Dragon with cooled air. They're also going to do a suit purge, running cooled nitrox through the suits for Bob and Doug just to keep things at a comfortable temperature for them as the capsule goes through the re-entry and starts to heat up.
So like we said, we are anticipating a brief blackout period where we're unable to communicate with the capsule. We're expecting that to start in exactly 3 minutes. That will last for 6 minutes total, and during that time we will be unable to command the vehicle or receive telemetry. That being said, Dragon is designed to be fully autonomous, so it's driving itself anyway. So Bob and Doug will stay fastened in their seats. Like I said, that anticipated loss of signal, or as you'll hear it called LOS, is anticipated to last for just 6 minutes. During that blackout period, the capsule will encounter what's known as entry interface. This is when the capsule is now really in the Earth's atmosphere and beginning to be subject to aerodynamic forces. This is also when a lot of that friction will begin to build up and raise the external temperatures.
Dragon SpaceX, we show 2 minutes until predicted calm blackout. We will see you on the other side at 1842.
Dragon copies 1842. We'll talk to you then.
So there's that heads up communication from Mission Control to Dragon Endeavour, confirming that comms blackout. Like I was saying, during the blackout, the Dragon capsule will be going through entry interface, where it is encountering aerodynamic forces, really starting to build up the external temperature and that external temperature will reach about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. However, the interior of the cabin is environmentally cooled, so Bob and Doug should remain comfortable during their descent. There will be cool air flowing not only through the cabin itself, but also through their suits. The suits have sensors on them that are able to detect the temperature inside that suit, and once that sensor reads that it has reached the maximum temperature threshold, it'll flush the suit with some cool air and really circulate and cool it down.
All right, well, we are right around that estimated blackout time. As we heard the call, we'll see them on the other side, expected to regain that communication at about 42 minutes after the hour. So for these next 6 minutes, they're already less than 60 miles in altitude. And this is when the capsule is really heating up during that reentry, reaching temperatures of around 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. As again, you're essentially hitting the atmosphere at more than 17,000 miles an hour, and the friction building up that plasma around the spacecraft. And that's what's going to prevent us from talking to Bob and Doug or getting data back from the spacecraft for the next 6 minutes. Its flight computers are in control, though. It's going to continue to maintain its appropriate trajectory and attitude, having attitude determination devices on board the capsule, not reliant on communications with satellites. And it's going to continue Dragon down the correct path for this splashdown off the coast of Pensacola. So we are in that blackout period. We're going to continue to stand by until we get them on the other side. All right, and just about 2 minutes after we get acquisition of signal, AOS, back with Dragon, we're going to be looking for those parachutes, and we should hopefully be getting some views from a couple of our assets out at the landing zone, including our WB-57 high-altitude research plane, which is going to be relying on Dragon's telemetry to actually lock onto it in the sky and give us an infrared view of the capsule during the final stages of reentry. We're going to be looking for the drogue deploys at about 44 minutes after the hour. Those will be 2 drogue shoots that are going to come out when the vehicle is still moving at about 350 miles an hour. And it'll be at an altitude of about 18,000 feet. They'll come out and do some initial slowing and stabilization of the spacecraft. And then less than a minute later, they'll detach and the 4 main parachutes will deploy. You'll see them come out and look kind of closed up initially, and then they'll do what's known as reefing, opening up in really 2 different stages just to minimize the immediate loads on the parachutes themselves. Those main parachutes will come out at an altitude of about 6,500 feet, with Dragon already slowed down to 119 miles an hour, and they'll do the rest of the slowing the whole way down until we splash down in the Gulf of Mexico. We should be 10 minutes away from splashdown.
So right now we're getting our cameras on the WB-57 airplane, which is in the area, getting those cameras ready to give us our first glimpse.
We should still have about 3 minutes left, a little less than 3 minutes, until we anticipate reacquiring our signal and our connection with Bob and Doug in the Dragon spacecraft.
If you're just tuning in, we are in a blackout period that we were expecting. This blackout period will last a total of 6 minutes, and we're about halfway through there now. At the moment, Dragon is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and due to the plasma building up on the exterior of the vehicle, we're unable to communicate or send commands, but Dragon is fully autonomous. It is steering itself, and right now, Bob and Doug are flying home.
Dragon SpaceX comm check.
So we're still inside that anticipated blackout window. It does look like we are getting maybe some sporadic data starting to peek through. This is why you heard that communications check with the spacecraft.
Dragon SpaceX comm check.
Endeavour has you loud and clear. We're about 3.9 G.
Copy. We've got you 5x5 as well, Doug. Looking good, and you can expect an automated chute deployment.
Copy. Good chute deployment.
All right, really good news there. We have come out of the blackout period, and we have reestablished connection with Dragon Endeavour with NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley on board.
We were able to reacquire that communication a little bit earlier than expected, and now we are just waiting. We should just be about 2.5 minutes away from that initial drogue chute deploy.
Yeah, 2 minutes and 26 seconds.
AGPS has converged.
Copy that.
You may have heard earlier that Bob and Doug are currently experiencing 3.5 Gs. Not too bad. That's about what they pulled during the ascent phase. Just like a mild roller coaster. So the vehicle is now over the Gulf of Mexico. It is approaching the landing zone off the coast of Florida near Pensacola, and there we have our first shot.
There it is, the first view from the WB-57 airplane. It is dipping in and out a little bit. This is going to be an infrared camera showing us Dragon re-entering. We have that comm back with Bob and Doug. You heard AGPS is converging. Dragon has 3 GPS units that it uses actually in the parachute deployment process as it helps, along with the pressure sensors, really give a solid altitude to the flight computers on when these are supposed to deploy. We're standing by for the drogue chute deployments. We should be just under 5 minutes away from splashdown.
Passing 15 kilometers, brace for drogue window.
Copy, we're braced.
Just about 14 kilometers in altitude, 8.4 miles, continuing to descend.
There on your screen, we have a shot of the capsule as it is preparing to deploy those initial parachutes, the drogue parachutes. Again, these parachutes help slow the vehicle down even further and help stabilize in preparation for main chute deployment. Right about now, the capsule is going about 400 miles per hour, decelerating quickly.
And standing by for drogue deploys.
Visual, 2 drogues out.
There on your screen, we have visual confirmation of those 2 drogue deployments.
Copy, 2 drogue.
All right, so 2 of 2, the drogues now out. They're going to do their slowing and stabilizing of the Dragon spacecraft. They should be detaching in just a few moments, and then we'll see 4 parachutes, the main parachutes deployed. Dragon under drogues.
Drogue descent rate nominal.
So the expected descent rate, the expected velocity under the drogues nominal. We're right at around 150 miles an hour and already dropping. You can see the drogues now detach.
And there we have confirmation of deployment of the 4 main parachutes.
We are visual on 4 chutes out.
We are visual. 4 main parachutes deployed.
Copy, 4 main.
So at this point, the main parachutes have deployed. They are inflating, as you can see there on your screen, continuing to slow Dragon down significantly. We are anticipating splashdown in just under 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
And we've already slowed the vehicle down to about 16 miles an hour. It's already less than 1 kilometer in altitude.
Main chute descent rate nominal, passing through 700 meters.
So at this point, Dragon has saved all propulsion systems on
600
board.
meters.
600 meters.
And we're 600 meters above the Gulf of Mexico.
Should be approximately 1:30 from splashdown.
Mission control team here in Hawthorne has reported the precise landing coordinates to the recovery team. They are standing by, ready to go get our space dads.
100 meters.
Just passed about 300 meters. 1 minute till splashdown.
200 meters. We are braced for splashdown.
Copy, brace for splashdown.
So there we heard Bob and Doug reporting that they are bracing for a splashdown. We should be able to see the Gulf of Mexico here in the shot just momentarily, as we're now just about 20 meters off the ocean.
Splashdown.
As you can see on your screen, we have visual confirmation for splashdown.
SpaceX copies and concurs. We see splashdown and mains cut.
Dragon Endeavour has returned home. NASA astronauts Bob and
Endeavour,
Doug.
on behalf of the SpaceX and NASA teams, welcome back to planet Earth, and thanks for flying SpaceX.
It was truly our honor and privilege to fly in flight of the Crew Dragon Endeavour. Congrats, everybody at SpaceX. All good, and we're into section 4.800.
Thanks for those words, Doug, and we copy that you are into 4.800.
So great news all around there. Our space dads are back on Earth after a 19-hour return journey from space. Dragon Endeavour has splashed down in the Gulf of Mexico, just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. And on your screen there, you can see our two fast boats, and they are indeed fast, racing out to greet Dragon Endeavour as it sits there. The first on there, we can see a view inside the capsule. Bob and Doug looking good. Although the communication was a little choppy, we did hear...
SpaceX Endeavour in 3.1, we show ourselves in stable 1.
And SpaceX copies for vehicle assessment, step 3.1, stable 1. Good news.
Stable 1, essentially. They're upright in the water. Stable 2, also another potential where it could be on its side or even upside down, but Dragon does have a water ballast system to keep it upright, where it's able to essentially pump seawater into bladders in the service section of the capsule. But they're upright. We already see the fast boats approaching. They touched down, came right on time at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 UTC. Bob and Doug now in the water, and the recovery ops, they've already begun. We already see the fast boats starting to move in. We're still maintaining that good communication back with Bob and Doug and the team here in Hawthorne. Pretty soon we should be getting the go for them to move in, begin their hypergol sniffs, and begin wrangling up those parachutes. But we can see Bob and Doug inside the capsule, back on planet Earth.
Yeah, those fast boats will be moving in to do a couple of things. They'll be performing what's known as a sniffer test. That's essentially to ensure that the air around the vehicle doesn't have any toxic fumes from the hypergolic propellants on board. So once we get the all clear from there, the water recovery lead will give the go for approach, and that's when the first fast boat will actually approach the capsule. Hopefully give a little wave to Bob and Doug through the window. And one of the team members will actually climb on top of Crew Dragon and begin to place the rigging equipment necessary to hoist Dragon out of the water.
Oh, still getting a view from the WB, the airplane flying overhead. It gave us those great views, really our first views of Bob and Doug re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. From up above. You can see the 4 parachutes in the water. We heard those were cut automatically as expected by Dragon. So for now, the crew just standing by. Again, they're going to stay in their suits, in their seats. We're waiting for all these initial checks.
Dragon SpaceX comm check.
Loud and clear, how else?
Loud and clear as well. Just wanted to verify a quick comm reconfiguration. Thank you.
So essentially what just happened there is they reconfigured...
And Solo, if you can just relay status of the fast boats and the recovery as you get them, we would appreciate it.
You bet. Absolutely, Doug. Wilco.
So what just happened there, you heard comms reconfiguration. That's essentially looping Bob and Doug's communication into the into the recovery team, so that they can hear feedback from Bob and Doug directly as well. Now, we talked a little bit about
SpaceX Endeavour. You can let Ben and James know we're doing pretty good so far.
Okay, we'll let the flight docs know that you're feeling good so far. Thanks for that update.
Really good news there to hear that they're feeling good, and they can let the flight surgeons know that all is well inside Dragon Endeavour.
All right, and it sounds like we do have one of our folks that's on location there with the recovery forces, NASA's Brandy Dean. She's joining us by satellite phone. Brandy, if you can hear me, I mean, what is it like right there in the water? What was it like to watch
Dragon? We're
watch them splash down
for the test objective. So stand by at the console once we get it up and operating. I'll let you know.
Okay, SpaceX copies. We'll be ready for that in just a couple minutes. We should have the go for you in just a moment. Please stand by.
you, but they're good.
There in the center of your screen, Dragon capsule, awaiting for the fast boats to approach and begin the rigging process. And there on the left-hand side of your screen, we can see that second fast boat come into view.
Dragon SpaceX, we are go for recovery personnel to approach. Expect personnel alongside in just under a minute.
Dragon copies. Thank you.
All right, so they're starting to move in. As Kate just said, that first boat's going to go in, sniff around the capsule for any traces of hypergalls. The second one's going to start rounding up the parachutes, which we're getting some really cool views from the WV-57 still flying overhead. Looking down, you can see the parachutes in the water, and the second boat start to gather them up. We'll try one more time real quick. We have NASA's Brandy Dean out with the recovery forces. Brandy, if you can hear me, what was it like to watch this Dragon come down under parachutes?
Oh, it was amazing. I wish everybody could have had my view. It was such a beautiful sight. I mean, it's a gorgeous day. The water is calm, really the best weather we could have asked for. And we heard the sonic booms as it made its way into the atmosphere, and then we were able to find it early on as the parachutes were deploying. So it was very exciting for everybody who was gathered here.
That's incredible. We actually had some questions from people if you'd be able to hear the sonic boom, and we weren't sure. So I'm really glad you just answered that for us. I mean, we talked so much about the weather. You said it looks great. What was it like on the ride out there? Has it just been kind of clear skies and clear seas the whole way?
I'm not sure if you can hear me right now, but I think you're asking about the weather, whether it was clear skies. There are just a kind of a circle of clouds along the horizon, very low, but we were able to see the parachutes far above the clouds and then follow it all the way until it splashed down.
All right, well, we're not getting any views on the boat, so what kind of activity is taking place right now? We're able to see the fast boats approaching the capsule. What's everybody doing on the boat to just kind of get everything ready?
The boat's also making its way towards the capsule. I can't see it with my bare eyes. But we're getting closer. Everybody's been kind of standing by, holding ready positions for quite a while now. So as soon as the splashdown gets able to just stand and start working on their own activities.
All right, copy that. Well, we're going to keep watching from here. Thanks for calling in, and thanks for being out there with everybody and getting us these great views. It's really incredible. Thanks, Brandy. Hope to get you back in port soon, and we'll talk to you back in Houston.
So there on your screen, camera view change. That is a view coming to us from Go Navigator, the recovery vessel. The two fast boats are out there getting ready to install the rigging equipment required to hoist Dragon out of the water. The other fast boat is actually collecting the parachutes from the water. We definitely want to bring those back on board with us. But shortly here, we should actually see one of the team members crawl up onto the side of the capsule in order to install the rigging, like I mentioned. That particular team member is highly experienced and highly trained. As you can imagine, climbing on top of an oddly shaped thing in the ocean could be a little tricky. So this person has undergone hours and hours of training and certification in order to perform this very important task. There on the right-hand side of your screen, we see the second fast boat approaching. Of course, both of these boats needed to wait for their cue from the water recovery lead in order to approach Dragon after splashdown. Again, that was just to make sure that there weren't any toxic vapors in the air. And now that they got the all clear, we do see them beginning to work on and around the Dragon capsule. So even though the camera's a little shaky, that water looks super, super duper smooth, almost like glass, which is certainly ideal for a water recovery like today.
Yeah, got to remember that this is a view from the main recovery vessel, which was still a few miles away from the splashdown
Dragon
point.
SpaceX. We have hypergol sweeps and unfired ordnance checks nominal. Rigger is on board the vehicle. About 5 minutes until capsule lift.
After that, yep, we see them walking outside, and good news.
All right, confirmation there that all of those hypergolic vapor tests came out positive, or rather negative, which is a positive thing. So the team was able to approach, and now the crew member that is installing the rigging is on top of the capsule. It's difficult to see there because the slower vessel, the primary recovery ship, is a little further away. But as we heard, it's just a mere 2.5 minutes until they will be hoisted out of the water. I'm sorry, 25 minutes, not 2.5. I misheard that.
Yeah, they're fast, but they're not that fast. We also have been hearing that the secondary boat, which its primary mission in this case is securing those parachutes, they've already got buoys attached to both drogues, and 2 of the 4 mains, and already had eyes on the other 2, so they're moving through that work pretty quickly. Again, their primary responsibility getting those parachutes together. The drogues detaching from the spacecraft right before the deployment of the mains automatically detaching immediately as Dragon detected splashdown. All of that happening right per the timeline.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about the hardwired buttons that Bob and Doug have on their seats and in their control displays, and cutting the main chutes is one of those buttons. In the event that they weren't automatically cut after splashdown, Bob and Doug would have had the ability to do so. If the winds were stronger and they caught the parachutes, it could certainly create a condition where the capsule could be moved unintentionally by those dragging parachutes. So definitely want to avoid that. So that's one of the few buttons that are hardwired into the cabin for the crew.
And again, right now we're expecting about 20 minutes for the main recovery vessel, the Go Navigator, to reach Dragon. By that point, all the rigging will be affixed, and then they'll be able to use the A-frame hydraulic lift on the back of the vessel to begin to pull Dragon up out of the water. Bob and Doug did report they're seeing the guys climbing around outside their window on the capsule, getting that rigging affixed. Still doing good from all of their reports. And we're just going to see the vessel continue to close in. It's a little over 1.3 nautical miles still away, but you can see things starting to sharpen up in our view as it does draw in closer.
One thing I didn't get to mention as the sequence events was happening, everything was going so quickly, just before the drogue deployment, the seats automatically rotated to about 26 degrees. And so if you think back to when we saw Bob and Doug while they were still on orbit and during the deorbit burn and all their departure burns, they were actually laying closer to on their backs at the 40-degree position, where essentially they were looking up at the top of Dragon capsule, like their stomachs were facing the top nose cone there. At this point, the seats would have rotated, so they're in a little bit more of an upright position. That's done to ensure that the loads experienced from landing are, doesn't hurt them. So at this point, they are not really laying on their backs in the ocean. They are seated upright a little bit, which would allow them to have a better view of the team working to install the rigging equipment. So at this point, we're at about 22 minutes until Dragon will be lifted onto the recovery vessel. Bob and Doug are still strapped into their seats, kind of like an airplane. You know, they say, do not unbuckle your seatbelt until the captain determines that it's safe to do so. They will remain in their seats throughout the entire recovery process, essentially until it's time to get them out. Like I said, we are expecting to lift Dragon onto the Go Navigator recovery ship in about 21 minutes. And then in 28 minutes, we will be opening that hatch and beginning crew egress, also known as exit.
And we did hear the rigging is pretty much complete, so right as they arrive there at the capsule, the main recovery vessel will be able to begin getting it up out of the water.
So now as the recovery vessel Go Navigator is getting closer to Dragon's position there off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, we're able to see the capsule in a little bit more detail. It is certainly no longer a bright shade of white. Like we said, those external temperatures were reaching up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So the thermal protection systems enable Dragon to return while keeping the internal temperature rather temperate.
And you are seeing a few more boats than expected. The team's currently working with a few private vessels in the area, making sure that they get out of there. And now we see one of the SpaceX fast boats moving in.
So we are being advised that the recovery team is radioing out to the vessels in the water near Crew Dragon to vacate the area so that we're able to extract Bob and Doug safely. Also for the safety of those folks in the area as well, not just Bob and Doug.
Yeah, this is obviously a dynamic operation. One of the first things we do is make sure there aren't essentially poisonous fumes around the capsule, so something like this just really can endanger the whole thing, endanger the crew members and endanger themselves. So the SpaceX team is moving in to try and get them away so they can safely recover the Dragon capsule and get Bob and Doug on deck and safely inside their medical quarters. So we can see them. They're getting a lot closer. We expect about 10 minutes or so until they should be in position. All the rigging has been affixed on the Dragon capsule, and once they arrive, they'll be able to use that hydraulic lift to get Dragon up and out of the water.
So the recovery vessel Go Navigator is getting closer and closer to Dragon Endeavour as it awaits its recovery, or as it awaits to be hoisted out of the Gulf of Mexico. Again, we landed just off the coast of Florida near Pensacola. Maybe next time we shouldn't announce our landing zone. Oh, there we got a shot from our WB-57 plane. It looks like that area has cleared out significantly, so that is good to see. And we're also hearing that all of the parachutes have buoys on them, so also good news as the recovery process continues for SpaceX Demo-2.
Dragon SpaceX for comm reconfig.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, Doug, we're about to reconfigure the forward link. We may lose that for about 1 or so minutes, and that should happen shortly.
Copy. Yeah, just give us a call back when you think you got it back.
Will do.
So as the main vessel gets closer, it's going to back up and get its hydraulic lift set up right next to the Dragon capsule, still in the water. Bob and Doug still inside, just waiting for that recovery. We should start the hoisting operations in the next 10 to 15 minutes. And then it'll be a pretty quick lift up out of the water using that hydraulic lift into the Dragon nest on the deck of the boat, or the ship rather. And then they'll move it underneath the helipad into essentially the crew recovery area, where they'll have a platform right up to the hatch. They'll be able to open up the hatch. SpaceX medical doctor will be the first one through the door, able to do a quick check-in with Bob and Doug on their status, and then he and the other medical doctors, flight surgeons, and trained technicians will begin to help them out of the capsule.
Yeah, earlier just after splashdown, we did hear Bob and Doug report that they were feeling good after reentry, so that was relayed to the flight surgeon, and good news to hear. Again, this is a view coming from the WB-57 plane as it is circling the area, and we can see Dragon awaiting to be pulled out of the water. Again, we are anticipating that lift to begin in just under 15 minutes. We're approaching 14 minutes here. And then in 21 minutes, we will have an open hatch.
And you can see the main recovery vessel in the top right there. That's the helipad with the big SpaceX X on top. It's now backing up towards the capsule.
Certainly not to be confused with one of our landing drone ships. There's a live view of Dragon floating in the water there in the background, along with many onlookers. Certainly from a safer distance at this point. This is a live shot coming from Go Navigator, our primary recovery vessel here. So it's Crew Dragon is also accompanied by the fast boats that are helping to bring it in closer. And there you can see a couple of the recovery team members on the deck. And also just behind them, we get our first good view of the nest. Yes, so this is essentially the nest in the background there. Dragon will be hoisted using the hydraulic lift out of the water and into that nest. That nest will then be pulled towards the camera from this view, towards those individuals on that upper deck there. And that's where the...
Dragon SpaceX comm check.
Loud and clear, Solo. How us?
Loud and clear as well, and from the video, it looks like the boat is about one length away, about 5 to 10 meters, backing up to you.
Copy that. Thanks for the update.
All right, so good news there. We're getting ready to see Dragon to be lifted out of the water and into the recovery nest. As I was saying, that nest will be pulled towards the camera, towards that upper deck that we saw there, and that's where the medical stretchers will be waiting to assist them into the medical bays for evaluation after capsule egress.
It's already been 25 minutes since they splashed down. It doesn't feel like it.
That
but
was definitely the fastest 25 minutes of the day.
the timeline we were anticipating was for the lifting operations to start within about 30 minutes, so we're pretty much right on the timeline still. That's been a pretty common thing so far today. You can see them with one of the fast boats getting it positioned to start moving out with the additional rigging to affix to the Dragon capsule, where they're going to use this A-frame to pull it up out of the water. And you can see the Dragon nest at the very bottom. It's that circular object with the A1 right on it.
So while this is the first time we are recovering a capsule with crew members on board, the recovery team has been...
And Dragon, just letting you know, we got a couple lines connected and rigging is in progress.
Copy that, SpaceX. Thank you.
All right there. So just updating the crew that they might feel some momentum as a couple of the rigging lines are attached. There we can actually, there's our first good shot of the individual who is placing that rigging equipment. Again, that's someone that's highly specialized and very well trained for these operations. As I was saying, the recovery team has rehearsed and practiced this with Bob and Doug themselves, actually, in a test capsule, practicing the egress, as well as they have practiced the recovery process many times. And actually, through those practice runs, they have effectively cut the recovery period in half from the initial Demo-1 mission. So it's really nice to see that the process itself, after being rehearsed and carefully choreographed, is going super efficiently. Again, safety is the #1 priority, so making sure that only personnel involved in active recovery operations are present on the deck. You may have heard us mention before that there are about 40 people on board today, but we certainly don't want anyone in danger or to fall overboard. That guy intentionally jumped. Speaking of falling overboard.
We're ready. Thank you.
All right, so the crew was just told in the next 30 seconds, they have the lines affixed, so they're going to start lifting the capsule up out of the water. And at this point, the communication we're getting with Dragon is actually being routed through the boat itself at this point. So there we can see the lift. Dragon is out of the water.
Yeah, so
now
now
that A-frame's going to start swinging it back. And it's bound right for that nest at the bottom of your screen.
There we're getting a better shot of all the points in which Dragon is tethered to the hydraulic lift, ensuring that it isn't swinging freely. And there we can see Dragon Endeavour being carefully set down into the recovery nest on top of Go Navigator.
Dragon SpaceX, welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing final checks and preparing to translate you to the egress platform.
Be happy. Thank you.
So for the first time in 2 months, NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley are on some sort of ground. I guess we can't call it solid ground because it is a ship. However, it is the first time that they are not in space, on a rocket, or bobbing in the ocean.
So now that they're in the nest, they're going to start translating it forward, and Dragon's going to move into essentially the hangar section underneath that helipad, and then up to that recovery platform that we saw a little bit earlier. At that point, the spacecraft technicians will work to open up the hatch. As we said previously, it's a manual process with a couple of different attachments you have to engage before the hatch itself can be opened. They'll get it opened, and then SpaceX's Neil Menon will be the first one through the hatchway to check in on Bob and Doug, get their initial health assessment, see if they're ready to move, and then we'll start assisting them out of the capsule and into that medical facility on the boat.
So at this point, the recovery team is doing final securing of the capsule in preparation to actually move the recovery nest into closer to the interior of the ship. It'll actually be in a little bit of a covered deck there. We saw that camera view earlier, looking straight out from the center of the boat. So once Dragon is secured in the nest will be translated then forward and closer to the recovery, closer to the position in which we're able to actually open the hatch. So while Dragon is on board safely, we're not able to do that just yet.
Yeah, they're working to detach some of those lines that were used to hoist it using the A-frame, and we heard that they should be done with that in just a moment, and then we'll start that translation.
So right now we can see the recovery team releasing those securing lines that were used during the lift of the capsule from the water into the nest. So they are releasing those securing lines from the sides, making sure it is secure from the bottom.
And there we see Dragon moving forward.
Look at that. Smooth as a Tesla, I would say. It's really interesting to see those scorching marks now that we get a really nice up-close detail shot of Dragon.
Standing by for the go for side hatch open.
That rounded square there in the center of the capsule is that side hatch, and on either side are those oval windows.
Dragon SpaceX, stand by for side hatch opening and egress.
Copy, we're ready.
All right, crew got the call. We are go for hatch open. And if you look closely, immediately above the hatch, you can see the area where you can see them working in now. That's where those drogue chutes deployed from. The two circles on either side were where the mortars were. The main parachutes now hidden by the platform underneath the side hatch.
So the crew is in the process of removing the side hatch. We can see that Go Navigator is in transit. It is making its way back to the Pensacola Naval Air Station. However, Bob and Doug will get a ride from the recovery vessel via helicopter. So again, we're preparing to open the side hatch, and once that is done, the flight surgeon will pop his head in, do an initial check, see how Bob and Doug are doing.
And Dragon SpaceX, we got a slight delay due to some potential NTO hits near the side hatch.
Copy, Mike. We're standing by.
And so they're still continuing to do kind of those sniffs, so checking for any vapors or anything. So those NDO, it's NO2, nitrogen dioxide, primarily can get detected in the air from the burning of fuel. So they're going to continue to just inspect around the capsule, make sure that it's, again, safe for the crew, safe for the recovery experts before they get this hatch open. But again, moving right along the timeline, it's since they splashed down at 11:48 a.m. Pacific. And so again, they're just pausing the operations for a moment, doing some additional air sampling around the prop system. We still have telemetry being fed from the vehicle, so flight controllers here in Hawthorne able to monitor prop tanks, propulsion tank pressures, and not seeing any issues with those at the moment. So again, just a short pause in the operations as, again, they're just sniffing around the capsule, making sure we don't have any readings that might indicate a fuel leak or anything around the vehicle. They did detect some NDO, some nitrogen dioxide, which is typically a residue that arises from the burning of fuel. So they're continuing to do just a couple of different air readings, grab samples essentially, before they proceed with the hatch opening.
And Dragon SpaceX update, we're still investigating. Looks like we'll be setting up a service section purge. We're working on an ETA for you.
Copy.
In case if you're just joining us, NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley have safely returned from the International Space Station. They made an on-time splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 a.m. Universal Time. And they have been pulled out of the water and hoisted onto the recovery vessel Go Navigator. And right now, the team is just completing, they did an initial check and found that there might be some remnant vapors, which we certainly don't want to be around when we have Bob and Doug coming out of the capsule. So the team is working to purge the service section in preparation for crew egress. Just a little commentary on the hatches that we've been talking about. So while Dragon's top hatch is used to connect to the International Space Station, that's the one that's located under the nose cone, which is currently hidden there at the top of the capsule. This is the side hatch is what is utilized for ingress and egress, both on the launch pad as well as coming up here on the recovery vessel. When the when the capsule is docked to the International Space Station, they will use the forward hatch to exit and enter the capsule. Something to note that once that side hatch is opened, it'll be the first time that Bob and Doug have gotten a breath of fresh air. The first time that they've been able to do so in 2 months since they boarded the Falcon 9 at the start of their mission back on May 30th.
Yeah, with an on-time splashdown, they return with almost exactly 64 days in space on this mission, just a few minutes shy of that. So I know they're looking forward to it. At a minimum, in a little bit more of a stable condition now that they're on the boat and not in the water. But again, our team's just continuing to step through. They're reporting that they're seeing all of the vapor levels that they initially detected have been dropping, and that service section purge.
Dragon SpaceX, we show that levels are declining, but are continuing with purge.
Copy.
And in addition, just so you know, we are not seeing any, leak indications or anything like that. These are pretty small levels, but we still need to do the purge at this time.
Okay, copy. Yeah, you're reading our mind, Mike. We were just wondering if you saw any indications of a leak or some depressurization somewhere, but it sounds like it's just part of the deal.
Yeah, that's a good read back, Doug.
All right, so we're just continuing to get a view down right at the hatch of the capsule. They are detecting those very small traces of a couple of the hypergalls. The one we've heard specifically mentioned was NDO or NO3 nitrogen or NO2 nitrogen dioxide. They are at very low levels, obviously not at a very harmful level, as we still have people in close proximity to the capsule. They are going through with the purge. They're not seeing any indications of a leak in the service section of Dragon. That's where pretty much all of those different fuel tanks with the hypergalls are located inside the capsule. And we are just about 44 minutes post splashdown, actually still ahead of the timeline, as we weren't expecting to get the hatch open until shortly before 60 minutes, at which point we'd be bringing Bob and Doug out. So this service section...
SpaceX, another update. The service section purge should begin in a bit under 5 minutes. Right now we're showing NTO about 2x of our personnel exposure limits, and we're hoping once we start the purge, it'll drop down for us.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
And I'm going to have to correct myself. So it's NTO, that's the dinitrogen tetraoxide, and that's one of the hypergallic fuels used inside Dragon for powering those Draco thrusters. So again, the SpaceX engineers detecting levels of NTO. It's dinitrogen tetraoxide. It's one of the hypergallic fuels used inside the Dragon spacecraft. Levels higher than they would like, so they're essentially doing a purge to help dissipate any vapors in and around the service section where those fuel tanks reside in the Dragon capsule. We're expecting that to take within the next 5 minutes or so. We were still expecting the crew out inside of an hour, so still on the timeline or a few minutes ahead, and we should be seeing Bob and Doug. Once we see those levels continue to drop around the capsule, we'll begin to step through the hatch opening process once again.
So right now we're getting ready to purge the service section. This is to make sure that the lingering NTO fumes that the team is detecting get flushed out, essentially. The service section is not the interior cabin where Bob and Doug are. It's actually the part of the capsule that is outside of the place where Bob and Doug are. It's external to the cabin, but it's inside the capsule itself. So you can think of it as the space between the exterior of the Dragon capsule and the interior space where Bob and Doug are. There's,
I think, the interior pressure vessel, essentially.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So Bob and Doug are fine. The air that they are breathing is, that nitrox mix that they've been getting throughout the entire duration of today's operations. But it'll be essentially the area below their cabin, completely sealed off from the service section. Yeah, that service section is where there's a lot of telemetry. It's where there are the prop tanks, and we're just making sure that those get aerated so that lingering fumes are swept away.
Yeah, again, they had detected higher levels than they want to see of nitrogen tetroxide. That's one of the two hypergolic fuels used in Dragon, the other one being monomethylhydrazine. Those two fuels, essentially when thrown together, even without an ignition source, will react. That's what makes them hypergolic fuels. Much simpler, more elegant solution used in a lot of on-orbit maneuvering systems in spacecraft. So again, we're just standing by.
So as you can see on your screen, there is one crew member that has kind of what looks like a...
Dragon SpaceX, don't have a huge update for you. Just letting you know the service section purge is still in work. And we'll try to get you out of there shortly.
Copy.
So as I was saying, two individuals on your screen there, one with a face mask and what looks like a scuba tank there with some clean breathing air. There might be another crew member with the same personal protective equipment or PPE that will come on deck here. That type of equipment, there we go. That's the kind of equipment that is required in order to perform this purge. Again, the NTO the fumes from that are toxic, And of course, we want to keep all crew members safe as we prepare the side hatch for opening in order to let
Dragon
Bob and Doug
SpaceX,
egress.
looks like limits are dropping and getting pretty good. We're still continuing with the purge just to be extra sure.
Okay, that sounds good, Mike. Thank you.
All right, so we just heard the call, the limits continuing to drop on that NTO, that nitrogen tetroxide. So they're just going to continue to monitor those. They're doing a purge, essentially flushing the air around the service section where the tanks for those hypergolic fuels are in Dragon. As Kate was talking about, they're not inside the pressure vessel, the section of the Dragon interior where Bob and Doug and their atmosphere exists. They're essentially outside the pressure vessel, but still inside the outer shell of the Dragon spacecraft. We are just about 52 minutes post splashdown. Again, we're just waiting for them to get good readings on the levels of any hypergol vapors still in existence around the capsule, and then they'll be able to step back in to this hatch opening. We did hear confirmation that they haven't seen any indication of leaks through the telemetry they're still receiving from the Dragon capsule. And so,
Dragon SpaceX, we're going to purge for 1 more minute.
Copy.
There we go, should be 1 more minute. And then if levels have dropped sufficiently, we'll be able to step back in to the hatch opening process.
Bob and Doug will be getting assistance from the recovery teams while exiting Dragon Endeavour. This is the same process for any returning long-duration crew members, as returning to a gravity-rich environment can, be a little jarring, wreak havoc with our vestibular system, which is responsible for maintaining balance and motion. Of course, as you've heard us say multiple times earlier, safety is our #1 priority with this operation. So you will see both Bob and Doug helped out of the capsule and assisted to just the few feet over to the medical quarters aboard the boat.
Yeah, if you've ever watched long-duration crews return on a Soyuz, it's a pretty similar process where they're literally carried out of the capsule and immediately placed down into a waiting chair, where they usually get some initial medical checks out there in the field before they're then carried to an inflated medical tent. We don't have a tent, we have quarters, and they're a whole lot closer, so they'll just have a couple of feet to go from the capsule itself into those medical quarters. And then once they're in there, they'll get some initial checkouts from their flight surgeons who are on location on the boat with them. These are the people that have essentially been responsible for their health and well-being throughout their mission, both beforehand, all of their pre-flight data takes, offering them support in the lead up to launch, and then the entire time while on board the International Space Station. And then they're right here with the front line, with the recovery teams, ready to welcome them home. So it's been just about a minute since we heard that last call to the crew. We should be just about done with the purge. We're going to stand by, and hopefully we'll resume these hatch opening operations in just a moment.
Dragon SpaceX 4 update.
Good.
Okay, exterior, we're seeing 3 parts per million NTO and 6 parts per billion of MMH. Anil, however, is asking that you de-stow your Draggers and take a sample inside the cabin.
Yeah, which detector? What number, Mike?
Yeah, it'll be detectors 2 and 3 in location 14.
Copy.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
All right, so we just got the call out of the current readings of both the NTO, the nitrogen tetroxide, and the monomethyl hydrazine, either in the parts per million or the parts per billion. But just as an extra safety precaution, we heard Anil, so Anil Menon, the medical authority from SpaceX, on the boat, asking the crew to take out some air detectors that they have inside with them, just to do some quick sampling inside the cabin itself. So again, we've said it before, we'll continue to say it throughout: safety, the top priority with this operation. So the teams are going to be very methodical and make sure that everything is in a good setup, a safe environment, not only for the crew themselves, but also for our recovery forces. But for now, Bob and Doug still inside of Crew Dragon. We are just 58 minutes post-landing.
SpaceX Dragon with a status.
Go ahead, Doug.
Okay, for NO2 on detector 2, it reads 0.0. And on detector 3, it also reads 0.0 for MMH.
Okay, great news. 0.0 for detectors 2 and 3 for NO2 and MMH. Thank you very much.
That's a good copy.
And so Doug Hurley reporting zeros across the board, no traces of either the NTO or the MMH.
Dragon SpaceX for a status update. Okay, so currently our exposure limits are below limits, but the purge is actually doing a pretty good job. We saw NTO go from 3 parts per million down to 1.5 over the last few minutes. So ideally, with a lot of caution, we'd go ahead and let the purge run for a little bit longer, but we want to see how you guys are doing. If you're okay with continuing with the purge versus knock it off and get you guys out of there quickly.
Yeah, we're fine hanging out, Mike. No problem here.
Okay, thanks for that, Doug. We'll keep working the purge to get us down, and thanks for that. Thanks for that.
Yeah, let's just keep everybody safe. No reason to rush.
Yeah, we concur.
Spacecraft Commander Doug Hurley reporting the crew still doing well in Dragon, so they are good to continue to hang out. The medical authority there on the boat recommending as long as the crew is okay and still doing well inside Dragon, they'll just continue with the purge, trying to get those trace recovery engineers and medical professionals there on the scene as well. So they're going to continue this purge, just dispelling the immediate area around the service section of the Dragon spacecraft. So this is really a series of fuel tanks outside of the pressure vessel. So where Bob and Doug are inside the Dragon spacecraft, which they did some quick readings inside the cabin and had zeros across the board. But they're just continuing to let these levels dissipate, bring it down to zero, and then we'll resume hatch operations. We're just a little over an hour now, an hour and 2 minutes post splashdown.
Yeah, good to hear Bob and Doug report that they're good hanging out, meaning they're feeling all right and they're pretty comfortable staying inside for just a couple more minutes.
Yeah, they were doing their best prior to leaving of playing up their expected seasickness. So good. It is good to hear that they're doing well still inside the Dragon capsule.
And Dragon SpaceX, we're still seeing good indications from the purge. We're looking to go about another 5 minutes and looking for zero indications. If at any time you'd like us to speed things up, please let us know.
Oh, we're good. Just keep doing what you're doing. Oh, we're good. Just keep doing what you're doing. We can wait the 5. Easy.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
All right, so we'll settle in at least another 5 minutes while they just continue to disperse any trace remnants of those hypergol fuels around the service section of Dragon before we once again step into the hatch opening. We're gonna stay with you, stay with this until Bob and Doug are out of the capsule and into their medical quarters.
At this point, Bob and Doug are still strapped into their seats. The seats have actuated away from the position where, I guess, in the orientation in which you see the capsule now. During their during the departure phasing earlier this morning and yesterday, the orientation of the seats were such that essentially Bob and Doug would have been laying on their backs in the orientation where we see Dragon now. Currently, the seats have actuated upward slightly, so they are not completely upright. They are reclined a little bit, nice and comfy there, but they are able to see in and out of those windows there that we see on either side of the side hatch.
And then once they're able to finish the egress process, getting Bob and Doug out of the capsule, once they're in the medical area, they'll look to start bringing in the helicopter as both Bob and Doug are going to be flown back to Pensacola via helicopter, getting them to the shore in just a matter of minutes, where a NASA plane is going to be standing by to then load them up and bring them home to Ellington Airfield at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
And Dragon SpaceX, things are still trending well. We're expecting another reading in about 2 minutes, so at 1956, and looking to hopefully egress you guys shortly after that.
Okay, sounds good, bud. Thank you.
In light of one of the social media questions that we were asked earlier, someone asked if Bob and Doug have Netflix available on their heads-up displays there in the capsule, and they've actually been pretty busy throughout this mission. You know, monitoring telemetry and data, and checking for timing. And I would say now's about the time that they would certainly want something to watch, because you know, at this point, their only job left to do is get out of the capsule.
Has to be a feeling of just success, though, for those two. I mean, taking the first flight in a brand new spacecraft, we knew as test pilots, this is something that was kind of their bread and butter when they were in the military, and definitely something they leapt at the chance for once they became astronauts. And really a pretty flawless flight for Dragon. Obviously, we'll have all of the post-flight review coming up in the next several weeks as we continue to assess all the data that we received throughout the mission, and any data still recorded locally on Dragon itself. And we'll be spending the next several weeks going through and assessing the mission and working through the certification process. And we're already targeting the first operational flight, currently pegged for no earlier than late September.
And Dragon SpaceX, we're now planning to stop the purge in 1 minute at about 1957.
Copy. Thank you.
All right, well, with them stopping the purge in about a minute, that means that the levels have gone down to what they were looking for, and then we'll begin to step back into the hatch opening process, and then be able to get Bob and Doug egressing or moving out of the Dragon capsule. They've been in there for a little more than 19 hours at this point since they departed the space station on Saturday. They had a sleep period, 8 hours of rest on the capsule on their way home. They've been up since a little bit earlier this morning, that wake coming about 4:40 a.m. Pacific, so a little more than 8 hours ago.
And Dragon, the purge is now complete. One more Drager check, and then we should proceed with hatch opening.
Okay, good news. Thanks.
That is good news indeed. So confirmation that the purge is complete, and that they're just going to do one more test to make sure that all of the fumes of concern are away, and that it is safe to open that side hatch and retrieve Bob and Doug. Once again, once that side hatch is open, our flight surgeon will be the first to say hello, get a quick medical checkup, although based on the reports that that the crew have been giving us along the way, it sounds like they're doing great, they're feeling good, and they're pretty comfortable there inside a Crew Dragon.
And Dragon SpaceX, we show 0.4 parts per million on NTO, 18 parts per billion of MMH. That's below limits. We are proceeding with hatch opening.
Okay, great news. Thanks, Mike.
All right, so there's the green light we've been waiting for. In fact, the green light we've been waiting for months at this point. This is our first opportunity to say hello to Bob and Doug, our favorite space dads, as they are now about to egress or exit from Dragon Crew Endeavour. Again, this is the culmination of what has been about a 19-hour journey home, all starting yesterday as they departed the International Space Station. So this hatch will be manually opened, and once doing so, Flight Surgeon Neil Menon will say hello and make sure that they're still doing all right, and then proceed to assist them with exiting the capsule.
And we see the hatch is now open. Hatch being opened at 12:59 p.m. Pacific. Hatch is open.
So right now they're going to put a piece of equipment in there that basically smooths out the edges and makes sure that it is a comfortable exit from the Dragon capsule. Just a little piece of structure there to ensure that the hatch will remain open and that any sharp edges around that side hatch are protected.
In the blue suit there, that's one of NASA's flight surgeons for the crew. That's Dr. Stephen Hart. And that hatch open coming at 12:59 p.m. Pacific. That's 1959 Universal Time, or GMT.
So once again, the SpaceX recovery team is now assisting NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to exit the spacecraft.
Sorry, we got the hatch open just about 2 minutes ago. We paused for a little while as they were just detecting some trace amounts of some of the hypergol fuels. So we executed a series of purges. And then once those were down back in acceptable limits, we were able to then start with the egress.
So there we see a stretcher on deck. This is normal. This is part of the standard recovery procedure. And it is just simply to ensure Bob and Doug remain safe. Like we said, readjusting to gravity can be a little challenging. Dizziness can often occur, especially when you're on a boat.
SpaceX Dragon, recap.
So this stretcher will just be used to as standard procedure to make sure that the astronauts make it over to the medical tent as easily and as comfortably as possible.
Yeah, as we discussed, the reintroduction to gravity from microgravity can be a bit jarring, especially on our vestibular system, so the stuff responsible for our balance. And as they are on a ship underway, we just want to make sure we're taking every possible precaution to ensure that their arrival is safe and free from any injury now that they are home. And they're working to get a few of the items from the seats out of the way first before they begin extracting our crew members. They'll be coming out one at a time.
As we saw during the ascent portion of this mission, there is enough room inside the capsule for them to do a backflip in microgravity. However, considering there's a couple folks in there right now from the recovery team.
Count check.
Got you loud and clear.
Quick comm check there between Dragon and Mission Control
And
here.
Solo from the PLT, I just wanted to thank you guys for bringing us home safe before I disembarked from ship Endeavour. I'm sure Doug will have some good words for you guys as well, but thank you for doing the most difficult parts and the most important parts of human spaceflight, getting us into orbit and bringing us home safely. Thank you again for the good ship Endeavour.
Thank you, Bob, for those awesome words. It's absolutely been an honor and a pleasure to work with you from the entire SpaceX team. It's been awesome.
Some initial words from NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. He's in the pilot seat, so you've heard him refer to himself as PLT. We're still standing by for our crew members to begin making their way out of the Crew Dragon spacecraft. And again, they're going to get some assistance just the couple of feet to the medical quarters on board the ship, where they're going to be able to get out of their suits that they've been wearing for all of the final dynamic phases of the separation events, deorbit burn, re-entry. Splashing down just a little over an hour ago at 11:48 p.m. or a.m. Pacific time.
Again, the recovery team.
SpaceX Dragon from the commander.
Go for SpaceX.
Here we have our first view of Doug
Mike,
Hurley.
I just would like to sort of reiterate what Bob said and add my thanks to everybody over the last several years that's either worked in Hawthorne, McGregor, or down at Kennedy Space Center. Anybody who's touched Endeavour, you should take a moment to just cherish this day, especially given all the things that have happened this year. We certainly can't thank you enough. Our families can't thank you enough. And just proud to be a small part of this whole effort to get a company of people to and from the space station. They can celebrate with each other.
We see some.
And we'll talk to you soon, hopefully in person.
Thanks so much, Doug, and you're welcome. And thank you so much for those kind words. And we all wish you a safe journey home and a happy reunion with your family soon. And we look forward to seeing you in person as well.
Some really nice words there from Bob Behnken.
Mikey.
There on your screen, we saw NASA astronaut Doug Hurley egressing or exiting from the capsule. Might have been hard to see on your screen there, but we got a thumbs up indicating that things are going well. Sorry, excuse me, I mixed up my positions there. Yeah, those words were from Doug, and we have Bob that just came out first.
Yeah, so Bob Behnken, the pilot, the Joint Operations Commander for this mission, out of the capsule now. So he's making his way over to the medical area, and now they're going to work to get Doug Hurley out next.
I think I saw a smile on Bob's face.
He was a thumbs up all the way. As they've been giving us some regular status updates from inside the capsule, they've been feeling really good. And so now we're just standing by for our spacecraft commander, Doug Hurley, to make his way out into the fresh air for the first time in 64 days. All right, so they're getting set up, and we should see Spacecraft Commander Doug Hurley making his way out of the capsule. And it looks like we've got him out. We've got him seated. And there we go, another thumbs up. We've got some applause here.
And as you can see in Mission Control, a standing ovation for a job well done all around.
Yeah, our crew members, Bob and Doug, are now safely back home on Earth, and they're going to get checked out now by the NASA medical team. They're going straight into the medical quarters on board the ship. That'll be their first stop on planet Earth, and then they're going to be making their way up into a helicopter and then heading back to dry land. So once they're complete, the team's going to prepare Dragon itself, and they're going to begin taking it back to shore. It's been an incredible, incredible mission. This all kicked off just 2 months ago on May 30th from Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We had a successful liftoff. We had to dodge around some weather. It was suspenseful, clearing up the last possible moment. They had a flawless ride to orbit, a 19-hour journey to the International Space Station, where they just spent 62 days on board, 64 total days in space. They were Expedition 63 crew members doing science experiments, spacewalks, repairs, everything on board the orbiting laboratory.
Their journey home began yesterday when they closed the hatch to Dragon and undocked hours later at 4:35 p.m. Pacific. After 4 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Bob and Doug rested up before waking up for re-entry earlier this morning. We successfully jettisoned Dragon's trunk and performed our final on-orbit maneuver, the deorbit burn, at 10:56 a.m. Pacific to send Dragon on the path home. The spacecraft successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 mains, with the final splashdown occurring off the coast of Pensacola, Florida at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, right on time. Following that successful splashdown, we saw SpaceX recovery experts quickly move in and prepare Dragon Endeavour for its lift onto the recovery vessel. And just a little less than an hour following splashdown, we saw Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley make their way, thumbs up, out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
Yeah, we just got word that the helicopter itself should be landing soon, so that'll be their next step in their journey. They'll catch a short flight back to shore where they're going to transfer to a waiting NASA plane for another short flight back over to Houston. They're going to be reunited with their families, and that's going to bring an end to this historic flight. It's really been an honor and a privilege to share this journey with all of you as we open up this new era in human space flight. But I mean, just as we close the book on this mission, we're already counting down the days to the next Crew Dragon flight.
Yeah, absolutely. SpaceX and NASA will now begin the process of reviewing data and telemetry from this successful demonstration mission to prepare us for Crew 1, which is currently targeted to launch no earlier than late September. Crew 1 will be SpaceX's first operational flight, flying a full crew of 4 astronauts, including our first from Japan, one of the international partners on the space station. The mission will last approximately 6 months. It has been an incredible honor and joy to share this mission with the public, and the teams from SpaceX and NASA have worked so hard to get here and return this capability to fly humans from America. Continue to follow SpaceX and NASA online and on our social media updates for the next steps on the commercial crew program and the countdown to Crew 1.
And we're going to continue to share the progress of Bob and Doug's trip back to Houston on social media. We also have a briefing coming up real soon. It's going to include NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine and officials from NASA and SpaceX. That's coming up right at the bottom of the hour, 1:30 p.m. Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 20:30 GMT. So we're going to say thanks one more time for tuning in, cheering on Bob and Doug as they return home. And we'll see you next time when we'll once again be sending astronauts on American rockets in American spacecraft from American soil. So long.